Chapter 28. After Dai Nanzhou finished his story, the people in the dorm couldn't help but shiver. One of his roommates asked, "It can't be that strange, right? Is it the pattern that was printed on her bedsheet?" Dai Nanzhou smirked. "If it was a pattern, would I tell you guys? Let me tell you, that pattern wasn't printed at all. It's a pattern made of real blood." The people in the girls' dorm called the police. The police were there in the morning, but now the dorm is locked and no one is allowed to enter. I heard that the police took the blood samples back for testing. "Whose blood is that? Is it Su Ziyu's?" asked another classmate. Dai Nanzhou slapped his thigh. "That's the problem. Although Su Ziyu was scared, she didn't have any wounds on her body. No one knows where the blood came from." This morning, the people in the East Study Society came up with a conclusion. It's definitely a supernatural event. Then, he leaned over and looked at me proudly. "It's useless to rely on the police. We have to rely on people who know about feng shui. The people in the East Study Society have discussed it and are going to sneak in to investigate at night. How about it, Joe Lee? Are you interested in joining us?" This guy probably couldn't even tell a complete story, but he was quite arrogant. The people in the East Study Society were the same. They knew a little about feng shui, but they read people's fortunes all day long. They even organized haunted house expeditions. Fortunately, most of those haunted houses were made up. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to survive even if they had several lives. Didn't the police seal the dorm door and no one is allowed to enter? "How are you going to go?" Dai Nanzhou smiled proudly, then took out a key from his pocket and waved it in front of me. "This bro's girlfriend is the dorm leader. I already got the key. As long as we can sneak into the dorm tonight, we'll definitely be able to get into the dorm." I thought about it and wanted to persuade him not to take the risk. However, looking at his spirit, it was obvious that I wouldn't be able to persuade him. I gave up and nodded. "All right, let me know when you're going." "Sure." Dai Nanzhou patted my shoulder excitedly. "With you going, we'll definitely find out the reason behind this. It's not that I want to join in on the fun. It's just that this matter is filled with danger. If Dai Nanzhou and the others were to rush in, they might encounter danger. Anything that involved ghosts and spirits, as long as there was blood, it was definitely not a small matter. The human body originally had yang qi, and the blood was the place with the densest yang qi. The blood from the tip of the tongue and the tip of the finger could even destroy almost all evil spirits. Ghosts and spirits were naturally afraid of human blood. Once a ghost came into contact with human blood and was not afraid of it, one had to be careful. Moreover, according to Dai Nanzhou, Su Ziyu was holding a basin full of blood. If the situation is true, then that little girl is definitely not an ordinary ghost. I'm afraid that even I can't deal with her. The only good thing was that Su Ziyu didn't seem to be hurt, which meant that the ghost didn't have any intentions of harming anyone. Having agreed on this matter, I began to make preparations. When I helped Chief Lu check the geomancy of the ancestral grave, I'd asked him to get me a lot of cinnabars. I packed them in my suitcase and brought them with me. Also, it was easy to collect the karmic water in the school's bathroom. After preparing these two things, I went to the mountain behind the school and picked some peachwood branches. Peachwood swords were the most common magic tools used by geomancers. However, to use a peachwood sword, one needed to have the support of qi. Ordinary people couldn't use a peachwood sword, but they could use a peachwood branch dipped in cinnabar and karmic water to defend themselves. The death scripture recorded many talismans and magic tools to deal with ghosts. Their power was extraordinary. However, before one could comprehend qi, they couldn't use these things. No matter how many methods one had, they wouldn't be able to use them. This was the difference between some folk geomancers and real geomancers. Folk geomancers might know a lot about geomancy, but if they couldn't comprehend qi, they would never be able to enter the next level. They would forever be ordinary people. It was already late when I finished preparing. When I returned to the dormitory, Dai Nanzhou was already waiting for me. When he saw me, he hurried to take me to the female dormitory to meet the people from the E-Study Club. This time, the E-Study Club had sent more than 10 people, including 2 girls. According to Dai Nanzhou, these people were very popular. Basically, only the president, the vice president, and some staff members could participate. Ordinary members didn't have a chance. After we met, President Huang of the E-Study Club saw the peach would branch in my hand. "What is it?" After I introduced it to him, President Huang didn't think much of it. He reached into his pocket and took out a bunch of shiny yellow talismans. He smiled at me and said, "We're ready. We have a bunch of evil-subduing talismans. If that thing comes out tonight, it won't be able to return." This fellow scared me. Looking at the yellow talismans in his hand, I almost believed him. However, after I took one, I sighed in disappointment. The inscriptions on the talismans were actually a kind of formation. Although I hadn't comprehended the existence of chi yet, I had touched the edge. I could barely feel the power of the talismans. However, the yellow talismans in President Huang's hands were just scribbles. Not only had I never seen them in the death scripture, but I also couldn't feel any power from them. I asked him where he got these yellow talismans from. President Huang showed a pained expression and said that he begged it from a master of e-study. Although he said begged, it was clear that the price of this item wasn't cheap. I didn't ask further. I just insisted on giving everyone a peach would branch dipped in cinnabar and karma water, saying that it was better to be safe than sorry. Only then did President Huang reluctantly take it. After everything was prepared, we prepared to enter the female dormitory. Originally, I was worried about how to get in and was prepared to climb over the wall. Who knew that President Huang would give everyone a tag and go to the female dormitory security guard and tell him that we were here to check the illegal electrical equipment in the dormitory. Then he brought us in openly. I have to say, President Huang's ability to do things sneakily was much better than his knowledge of feng shui. After entering the female dormitory, we didn't dare to open the door since it was still early. Dai Nanzhou brought us to another female dormitory. After Su Ziyu's dormitory was sealed, the people from her dormitory temporarily stayed in this dormitory. When he saw Su Ziyu, this beautiful girl with shoulder-length hair was sitting on the bed, hugging her legs and reading a book. When she saw us coming in, she shrank back, her face showing a trace of panic. A short-haired girl came to greet us. It seemed she was Dai Nanzhou's girlfriend. She warmly invited us to sit down and called the other girls to come over and chat with us. All the girls in the dormitory gathered around us. Only Su Ziyu said that she wasn't feeling well. She continued to sit there and read. Of course, the topic of their conversation was related to what had happened last night. It wasn't much different from what Dai Nanzhou had told me. After listening to them for a while, I stopped paying attention to them and turned to look at Su Ziyu. The situation was beyond my expectation. In theory, after one came into contact with a spirit, one's body would be stained with thick yin energy. However, Su Ziyu didn't have that. She looked a little tired, and her face was a little swollen. Moreover, under her eyes, there were obvious eye bags. From her facial features, her lower eyelids belonged to the children's palace. Su Ziyu's lower eyelids were thick and slightly bulging. It was the sign that her children were about to grow up. Usually, this kind of facial feature indicated that the child was about to become an adult and would have some achievements. However, Su Ziyu was just a third-year student. How could she have a child? When boys and girls sat together in their adolescence, they wouldn't feel bored no matter how much they chatted. Soon, it was lights-out time. Half an hour after the lights went out, we made sure that the dormitory manager wouldn't come to the dormitory again. Holding a flashlight, we quietly went to Su Ziyu's dormitory and opened the door. As soon as I opened the door, I felt a wave of yin energy hitting my face. My previous doubts disappeared. Although I didn't know why Su Ziyu didn't have yin energy, I was sure that a spirit had been in this dormitory. I pulled myself together and read the Calm Heart mantra. I wanted to tell the other students to be careful. However, after looking around, I saw that everyone was tense. I didn't want to add to the tense atmosphere, so I didn't say anything. In the pitch-black dormitory, only the light from the flashlight illuminated the area in front of us. Moreover, the environment was much colder than outside. The members of the E-Study Club didn't have the same ambition as before, and they could only brace themselves to stay calm. Only Dai Nanzhou was brave enough. He raised his flashlight and walked to Su Ziyu's bed. He lifted the plastic sheet and excitedly said, "The mark left by the bloody basin is here." After shining the flashlight, I saw that the bedsheet was gone, and only the mattress was there. In the middle of the mattress, I could vaguely see a blood-colored pattern. I guess it was the blood on the bedsheet that had seeped out. Looking at the blood stain was completely different from listening to someone else talk about it. Even I felt cold, let alone the other students. They were so scared that they didn't dare to talk. I walked over and pressed my hand on the blood stain. Then, I rubbed it in front of my eyes to confirm that it was indeed blood. However, the blood stain was filled with an evil energy. It was cold to the touch, as if it had just been taken out of an ice house. While I was thinking about the strange blood stain, Director Huang stuck a yellow talisman on the blood stain. Then, he retracted his hand and said in a trembling voice, "It's done. We just need to suppress the blood stain. How about we go to the toilet to check?" I guess the others had the same idea, so they all agreed with him. I nodded. There were no ghosts in the dormitory, so we should go to the toilet to check. We left the dormitory and rushed to the toilet. Before we entered, the energy in the toilet was so thick that it gave us goosebumps. The toilet was a place to store energy, so it was usually colder than other places. Now, with the energy lingering in the air, the temperature was at least 10 degrees lower than outside. Dainanzhou mumbled, "Why is it so cold?" He had been brave before, but now he looked scared. Everyone hesitated in front of the toilet. In the end, Director Huang couldn't stand it anymore. He took out the yellow talisman to give himself some courage and walked in first. After we entered the toilet, my eyes gazed at the innermost cubicle where the energy was the thickest. The toilet wasn't the same as the dormitory. After the lights went out, the voice-activated lights wouldn't be turned off. Under the illumination of the bright lights, the group of people was much bolder than before. They chattered and yelled for the demons and ghosts to come out quickly. While they were making a ruckus, I walked to the last cubicle and opened the door. Dainanzhou and the others saw me and followed me. However, I waved my hand and asked them to wait outside. After we entered the cubicle, the energy became even thicker. However, there was nothing inside. Ghosts didn't have a physical body. If they didn't want you to see them, ordinary people wouldn't be able to see them. Only a geomancy master could see them. I didn't have such an ability yet, so I just stood there and closed my eyes to feel. Right at this moment, I heard a young child's voice. Chapter 29. I was shaken when I heard the voice. When I had closed my eyes, I had been chanting the ghost-seeking spell. This spell could help me locate the ghosts around me without opening my heavenly eye. However, I didn't find anything strange until I heard the voice. I opened my eyes and saw a little girl standing in front of me. She had long hair and a round face. She wasn't wearing any clothes and was wrapped in a tattered bedsheet. Two very large eyes looked at me, seemingly full of curiosity. She looked like a normal little girl. However, if I looked closely, I would see a tinge of cyan under her fair skin. She didn't cast a shadow under the light. Looking at the innocent little girl in front of me, my heart felt numb. The death scripture said that as long as I chanted the ghost-seeking spell, all ghosts within 1 zhang of me wouldn't be able to hide. Who would have thought that I would encounter an accident the first time I used it? In my memory, I had seen the soul of my middle school classmate, Guan Mingming, and I had seen Chief Lu's ancestor appear outside the ancestral grave. However, their souls were very vague, not as solid as this little girl in front of me. The feeling this little girl gave me was similar to the feeling I had when I saw the female corpse. It was as if her real body was standing in front of me. However, I knew that when I had walked into this room, there had been nothing there. I squeezed the peachwood branch in my hand. I didn't dare to be careless because of the little girl's innocent appearance. Back then, the female corpse also looked very graceful and alluring, but as soon as she made a move, it was a killing move. After a while, the little girl got bored. She made a face at me, pushed the door open, and skipped out of the room. I exhaled in relief. Then, I remembered that the people from the study club were still outside. My heart tightened, and I hurried to follow her. As soon as I reached the door, I bumped into Dainanzhou. When he saw me, he exhaled in relief. "What were you doing in there? Why did I hear you talking to someone? Don't scare me." I was afraid that something might happen, so I didn't have time to talk to him. I pushed him away and looked around. The students from the e-study club were standing not far from me. They looked at me curiously, but they didn't seem to see the little girl. I looked around and saw the little girl standing in front of the toilet. Her big eyes blinked as she peeked inside. When she saw me, she made a face at me, then turned around and walked out of the toilet. I didn't have the confidence to subdue this strange baby girl, and I didn't dare to provoke her. I didn't tell the others, but I told them that I wanted to go back to the dormitory to look for clues. Then I asked for the key and hurried out of the toilet. When I got out, I saw the little girl standing in front of Su Ziyu's dormitory. She was pushing the door with both hands, and her feet were kicking the ground. Her body was bent at an angle. However, Su's dormitory was still locked, and she couldn't push it. Moreover, ghosts and spirits had illusory bodies, and most of them didn't have any energy. Although this little girl was different, she was still one of them. After I followed her, she gave up on pushing the door open, turned around, and said to me with a pout, "Degidge, can you help me open the door?" Seeing that the little girl didn't look fake, I braced myself and nodded at her. Then I asked her, "What do you want to do inside?" The corners of the girl's mouth curled up. "I'm going to find my mommy." I was startled and thought of Su Ziyu. However, the little girl in front of me looked around 5 or 6 years old. She couldn't be Su Ziyu's child. I asked, "Who's your mommy?" The little girl said, "Mommy is my mommy. Big brother, help me open the door. I haven't seen my mommy for a long time." Then she grabbed my arm and hung on it like a spoiled child, swaying from side to side. Her body was very light, and she hung on my arm as if she was weightless. Since there was no one in the dormitory, I wasn't worried that something would happen to her. I opened the door with the key and walked in with the little girl. After entering the room, the little girl excitedly ran towards Su Ziyu's bed. She stopped when she reached the bed and pouted, sobbing, "Mommy's not here anymore." I was even more puzzled. I pointed at Su Ziyu's bed and asked the little girl, "Did Mommy sleep here before?" "Yeah." The little girl rubbed her eyes and sounded wronged. "Yesterday, I asked Mommy to play with me, but today Mommy left. She doesn't want me anymore." Sob. Then she pouted and cried again. However, Ghost didn't have tears. Although she cried for a long time, she didn't shed any tears. I was even more puzzled. Is Su Ziyu really this little girl's mother? But Su Ziyu is only 20 years old. 5 or 6 years ago, she was only 14 or 15. How could she have a daughter? I couldn't figure it out no matter how I thought about it. But looking at her sad face, I felt sad too. I thought for a while and said, "Don't cry. I'll take you to find your mommy. Okay?" "Really, big brother?" After hearing my words, she stopped crying and happily hugged my arm again. She rubbed her head against my body and acted like a spoiled child. Although this little girl had scared Su Ziyu, she hadn't really hurt her. If she saw Su Ziyu again, she wouldn't be in trouble. With that thought in mind, I took the little girl to Su Ziyu's dormitory. When we arrived, the girls in the dormitory were still awake. I guess they were waiting for us. Only Su Ziyu was lying on the bed. She seemed to be asleep. Seeing Su Ziyu, the little girl cheered and ran over. She lay on Su Ziyu's bed and whispered something in her ear. The other people in the dormitory couldn't see the little girl, so they could only see me. "How are you doing? Did you find anything?" I smiled and shook my head. "We're just here to have fun. What can we find?" After chatting for a while, I saw Su Ziyu suddenly sit up on the bed. Her eyes were blank as she got off the bed. Then, she took out a wash basin from under the table. She held it in her hand and slowly walked out. The girls who were chatting with me all shut their mouths. They opened their eyes wide and looked at Su Ziyu. They were all dumbfounded. They could only see Su Ziyu walking out alone, as if she was sleepwalking. Only I could see that the little girl was pulling on Su Ziyu's clothes, leading the way in front of her, and she was chattering about something. It wasn't until Su Ziyu brushed past us and reached the door that the girls in the dorm reacted. Dai Nanzhou's girlfriend's face was pale. She asked me with lingering fear, "Little Zhou, what should we do now? I'm afraid something might happen to Ziyu. Should we follow her?" I shook my head. "You guys stay in the dormitory and don't move. I'll follow her." I followed Su Ziyu out of the dormitory. The little girl led her to the toilet. When we reached the door, we bumped into Yi Shuesh's classmates. President Huang was walking at the front. As soon as he walked out of the toilet, he saw Su Ziyu, who was holding a wash basin. President Huang's face paled, and he fell to the ground. The others were also scared, and their faces were pale. In the end, Dai Nanzhou walked up and patted Su Ziyu's shoulder. Su Ziyu's body shook, and the dazed expression on her face disappeared. The wash basin in her hand fell to the ground with a clang, and her face was pale. Seeing that she had woken up, a group of people quickly surrounded her and asked her what happened. Su Ziyu briefly explained the situation. It was the same as yesterday. She was brought here by a little girl. Then President Huang anxiously asked her where the little girl was. Su Ziyu pointed at the toilet door and said, "She's there." The little girl was indeed standing at the toilet door, looking at Su Ziyu with a wronged expression. However, the others couldn't see it at all. They could only look at each other and chat for a while. Then, they sent Su Ziyu back to the dormitory. After a noisy night, we didn't find anything. After persuading Su Ziyu to sleep, I sneaked into the toilet again. At this time, the little girl was running back and forth in boredom. When she saw me come in, she stopped and asked me in disappointment, "Dagij, why do you think Mommy doesn't want to play with me?" I patted her hair and smiled. "Mommy isn't feeling well these few days. Don't go find her. Mommy will come and play with you in a few days." "Really?" She looked at me in surprise. I nodded, and the little girl became happy. She smiled and said that she would go find her mommy in a few days. Then she said goodbye to me, turned around, and skipped back to the toilet in the innermost room. Then she disappeared. 3 days later, the results of the police's blood investigation came out. The blood on Su Ziyu's bed was the blood of a senior who studied in our school 7 years ago. This senior had committed suicide in school 7 years ago. Rumor had it that this senior had accidentally gotten pregnant. After using drugs to perform an abortion, she couldn't bear the pressure and chose to commit suicide. After hearing this news, I immediately thought of the mother that the little girl had mentioned. If this senior was the little girl's mother, then everything could be explained. But why did she say that Su Ziyu was her mother? I couldn't figure it out. It wasn't until Dai Nanzhou came over and told me that Su Ziyu was pregnant that I finally understood. The senior from 7 years ago must have had a miscarriage in that toilet. The dead child's soul was left in the toilet, and it had been desperately looking for its mother. Until 7 years later, when she met Su Ziyu. The only memory the little girl had of her mother was probably how her mother looked when she was pregnant. Perhaps there was something special about pregnant women. Su Ziyu was the first pregnant person she had met, so she treated Su Ziyu as her mother and went to look for her every day. Thinking about it that way, everything made sense. However, there was still one question that bothered me. Something like a Yin soul was a combination of a human soul and an earth soul. It was something that was created by chance, and it would forever maintain the appearance it had when it died. But the little girl in the toilet was just a baby when she died. Why did she turn into a little girl that looked like she was 6 or 7 years old? Chapter 30. Growth and reproduction were the unique characteristics of living beings in the Yang world. Feng Shui said that solitary Yin creatures didn't grow, which meant that Yin spirits couldn't grow. On the other hand, from a scientific point of view, matter was conserved. If ghosts and spirits didn't absorb energy from food, they couldn't grow. However, something that didn't make sense had happened right in front of my eyes. Since nothing strange happened after that, the school decided that it was Su Ziyu's case of sleepwalking. They tried their best to cover up the rumors, and the case was left unsettled. From my knowledge of Feng Shui, I thought that the school's theory was more reliable than the theory that she was the baby girl from 7 years ago. However, I didn't know why I believed that she was the baby girl. To verify my theory, I asked Dai Nanzhou to find the birth date and photo of the girl. I wanted to summon the soul of the girl, named Chun Tingting. Summoning the soul was a necessary skill for Feng Shui masters, and there were many methods recorded in the death scripture. With my current ability, it wasn't too difficult. However, the soul summoning ritual required something that had the aura of the deceased. The best choice would be the undergarments of the deceased. However, 7 years had passed, and I couldn't find Chun Tingting's undergarments. Left with no choice, I went to Su Ziyu's dormitory and collected some blood samples from her mattress. I was a little skeptical. The little girl had been looking for her mother, which was why she had lured Su Ziyu to the toilet. But why was Chun Tingting's blood on Su Ziyu's mattress? With this question in mind, I prepared the items needed for the soul summoning ritual and went to the female dormitory. Dai Nanzhou was excited when he knew that I wanted to summon the soul. He insisted on coming with me because I needed him to enter the female dormitory. Left with no choice, I took him with me. This time, without President Huang and the others leading the way, we didn't dare to pretend to be members of the student council. We followed the most common route that boys used to enter the female dormitory, which was to climb over the wall. At around 11 o'clock p.m., we climbed into the female dormitory. With Dai Nanzhou's girlfriend waiting for us, it was a smooth journey. When I saw Su Ziyu again, I checked her face. Her lower eyelids were still the same as a few days ago. However, after learning about her pregnancy, I understood that this wasn't the face of a child that was about to reach adulthood. It was the face of a child that was about to take shape in her body when she was 2 to 3 months pregnant. A fetus is an adult. In ancient times, the ceremony of coronation was also an adult. Because the fetus's formative period was relatively short, many inexperienced feng shui masters couldn't think of this and made a wrong judgment, just like what happened to me before. Su Ziyu's face was still pale, and it seemed like her body wasn't feeling well. Because of this incident, her pregnancy was also known by her classmates, and now she was burdened with great pressure. As a 20-year-old university girl, she would definitely not be able to bear the pressure brought by this kind of thing. In the end, she would definitely abort the child and hide from her classmates. If her mental fortitude was slightly weaker, perhaps the tragedy of Chun Tingting 7 years ago would happen again. Looking at Su Ziyu, I thought about the fetus in her body, which made me feel uncomfortable. Although the birth of this child might have been a mistake, abort the child was the same as making up for this mistake with another mistake. The fetus had to go through a developmental process. From a feng shui point of view, a 2-month-old baby's 3 souls weren't complete, and it hadn't formed its fate yet. In layman's terms, it didn't have any vital signs. From a legal point of view, it didn't have the right to life. If the child had an abortion, the parents wouldn't be affected much. However, after 2 months, the baby's heaven soul would gradually wake up, and its 3 souls would be complete. If the child had an abortion at this time, it would be the loss of a life. Moreover, the parents would kill their child, which was a grave sin. If the child had an abortion at this time, the parents would be affected by the karma for the rest of their lives. No matter how I looked at it, I didn't want to watch such a tragedy happen in front of me. Although it was hard for a female university student to bear this kind of pressure, if she could summon the courage to face it calmly and communicate with her family, there would be a solution. She was already an adult at the age of 20. As long as she had the courage, she would have the ability to face it. Of course, all of this depended on Su Ziyu's will. Hence, I decided to talk to her. I asked Dai Nanzhou's girlfriend to talk to Su Ziyu. Fortunately, she was willing to talk to me even though she was in such a mental state. I brought Su Ziyu to the dormitory alone. After we sat down on the stone bench, I asked her if she believed the school's last statement about her sleepwalking. Su Ziyu shook her head at first, but she immediately nodded. She wore a self-deprecating smile and said, "If it wasn't sleepwalking, what else could it be? Could it be like what your East Study Society said, that I met a ghost?" I sighed and told her about the little girl I had met that night. Then, I told her about the things Dai Nanzhou had found about Chun Tingting. After listening to me, Su Ziyu's face turned even paler, but her expression became more resolute. The self-deprecating smile on her face became more obvious. She smiled at me and said, "Junior brother, don't lie to us. Your East Study Society always talks about ghosts and demons, but who has ever seen one? A dead person doesn't have anything left, let alone an unborn child. How could that be? You must be lying. You must be making up a story." As she spoke, her voice started to tremble. In the end, she broke down and couldn't speak anymore. She covered her face with both hands as tears flowed down from the gaps between her fingers. She started to cry. As she cried, She mumbled some messy words. If he's dead, he's dead. What can I do? I've heard about what happened to that senior. After the accident, her boyfriend disappeared. What can she do alone? I don't have the heart to do it, but it's the same with her boyfriend. What can I do? After a long time, she finally calmed down. I patted her shoulder and sighed. Come with me to the toilet later. I'll call the little girl out, and you can see her again. Susie shuddered and finally stopped crying. She asked me, is what you said true? I nodded. You'll know when you see her. At around midnight, I brought Susie Yu and Dai Nanzhou to the toilet again. Because I wanted to summon Chun Tingting's soul, I had Dai Nanzhou's girlfriend stand guard outside to prevent anyone from barging in. After entering the toilet, I told Dai Nanzhou and Susie Yu to stand in the middle of the toilet while I went to the last cubicle and called out to the little girl. The Gidge is here to play with you. Are you still there? As soon as I said that, the girl with big eyes and a bedsheet appeared in front of me. She ran over and pulled my arm. She pouted. The Gidge, it's been so many days. I thought you were lying to me. I rubbed her head and smiled. Why would a Gidge lie to you? Come out and take a look. Who did a Gidge bring to see you? Hearing my words, she immediately let go of my arm and ran out of the cubicle. She shouted happily, "It's Mommy." Then, she ran to Susie Yu's side. She squinted her eyes and looked very happy. However, she didn't pounce on Susie Yu. She just stood there and smiled happily. At that moment, Dai Nanzhou and Susie Yu looked at me in confusion. It was obvious that they couldn't see the little girl. I walked over and pulled the little girl. Why don't you go and hug Mommy? Let Mommy see you? The smile on the little girl's face disappeared. She said sadly, I can't hug Mommy. It's not good for her. I can't let her see me either. Mommy will be scared. When I saw the beautiful female corpse kill people, I firmly believed that ghosts, no matter what they looked like, were going to harm people. But looking at the little girl now, my belief was finally shaken. I rubbed her hair and smiled. Don't worry. Mommy won't be scared this time. Let Mommy see you, okay? The Gidge, really? The little girl blinked at me. I nodded. Of course. You can hug Mommy too. With the Gidge here, I won't let Mommy get hurt. The Gidge, you're the best. The little girl rubbed her head against my arm coquettishly. Then, she happily ran over and hugged Susie Yu. The sudden appearance of the little girl scared Dai Nanzhou so much that his face turned pale. He took a few steps back. Although Susie Yu had seen her before, she was still scared. She resisted the urge to retreat and let the little girl hug her. Mommy, I miss you so much. The little girl snuggled in Susie Yu's arms and sobbed. Susie Yu's tears rolled down her cheeks. She hugged the little girl tightly and choked with sobs, unable to speak. I sighed and asked Dai Nanzhou for a cigarette. Then, we went outside the toilet to let Susie Yu and the little girl be alone for a while. After smoking one cigarette, Susie Yu walked out of the toilet. Her eyes were red. She walked to me and thanked me before returning to the dormitory. I didn't know what choice Susie Yu would make in the end, but I tried my best. The final result would depend on Susie Yu. After Susie Yu left, I brought Dai Nanzhou back to the toilet. The little girl was still standing inside. Her eyes were curved, and her mouth was pouting. She was crying sadly, but no tears came out of her eyes. I went over and rubbed her head. I sighed and said, That big sister wasn't your mommy. The Gidge, can you call your mommy out? The little girl said sadly, Mommy said she wasn't mommy, but mommy is mommy. Woo! The more she talked, the sadder she became. Eventually, she started crying again. I hugged her and comforted her for a while. After she stopped crying, I called Dai Nanzhou and took out the things needed for the soul summoning ritual. I was going to summon Chun Tingting's soul. For the soul summoning ritual, I needed to light 3 soul summoning incense sticks. Then, I put the mattress with Chun Tingting's blood in a basket and wrote her birth date on a piece of yellow paper. Then, I prepared a bowl of white rice and a white thread. After everything was prepared, I buried the white thread in the rice bowl. Then, I lit the yellow paper with Chun Tingting's birth date on it and threw it into the basket. Then, I chanted, Wandering souls, where can they stay? The 3 souls have long since descended, and the 7 spirits have come. By the river, in the wilderness, in the temple, in the village, in the palace, in the forest, in the graveyard, in the forest, in the false alarm, in the lost soul. Today, I invite the mountain god, the 5 wandering generals, the earth god, the kitchen god, and the 5 servants to gather the souls and gather them here. After I finished chanting, I slowly pulled the white thread out of the bowl. Chapter 31. After a person died, the heaven soul would return to heaven, and the earth soul would vanish. Only the human soul would be left floating around the corpse. After a long time, it would gradually vanish. Occasionally, the earth soul that didn't vanish would combine with the human soul and become what we called ghosts. Soul summoning had nothing to do with ghosts. Soul summoning was to summon the human soul. There were 2 kinds of soul summoning techniques. One was the soul summoning technique I was using to summon the wandering souls in the mortal world. As for the human soul that had vanished, it was believed that it had entered the netherworld, which required another soul summoning ritual. According to the death scripture, if I wanted to summon a soul from the netherworld, I had to use a grand formation. I needed to prepare the soul summoning banner and draw the soul summoning talisman. It wasn't something I could do at this moment. Of course, Chun Tingting had committed suicide, so her resentment was heavy. A human soul wouldn't return to the netherworld that easily. My method should be enough to summon her. Things didn't go beyond my expectations. When I started to pull the string in the bowl, I felt a cold wind blowing by my ears. A shadow slowly formed in front of me. Everything was going smoothly, but I felt something was wrong. I had only pulled out half of the white string in the bowl, and Chun Tingting's soul was about to take shape. It was too fast. Indeed, when I was halfway through the white string, a vague shadow of a woman had formed in front of me. As I continued to pull out the string, the woman's shadow became more solid. It was a sign that the earth soul still existed. In other words, Chun Tingting's soul had become a ghost. Judging from how fast she had arrived, the place where her ghost had been after her death should not be far from here. It was strange. If Chun Tingting had become a ghost and had retained her memories, she should know that her daughter's soul was in this toilet. She shouldn't have come to see her daughter. After the white string was completely pulled out, a female ghost with disheveled hair appeared in front of me. She looked at me with bloodshot eyes. She looked very scary. The bloodshot eyes were a sign that she had harmed people. It seemed Chun Tingting wasn't only a ghost, but she had also harmed people. I didn't dare to be careless. I picked up the peach branch and asked the female ghost, "Are you Chun Tingting?" The female ghost didn't answer. She ferociously stormed toward me. She opened her bloody mouth and looked extremely terrifying. I raised the peach branch and waited for the female ghost to reach me. Then, I lashed her with a whip. The female ghost let out a deafening scream. A cloud of gray mist rose from where the whip hit, and the color of the surroundings dimmed. However, the female ghost seemed to have gone crazy. She didn't care about me and kept dashing toward me as if she couldn't feel pain. I squeezed the peachwood branch in my hand and lashed it again and again. Each time I lashed her, a wisp of gray smoke rose from her body. When the ghost finally stopped, the color of her body had dimmed. She retreated far away from me. Her blood-red eyes were filled with fear and malevolence. Cinnabar and the water of retribution were very harmful to ghosts. Since Chun Tingting could endure so many lashes before retreating, it was enough to prove that her ghost was very powerful. If a ghost wanted to increase its power, there were only 2 ways. One was to swallow other ghosts, and the other was to kill people. After they died, it would swallow their souls. From Chun Tingting's situation, I guess she had killed many people and swallowed many souls. It was also the reason why she was so violent and crazy. After swallowing a lot of souls, a ghost would become crazy and instinctively want to kill people. Chun Tingting finally calmed down after being beaten into submission like a human. She looked at me cautiously and said in a hoarse and unpleasant voice, "Why did you call me over?" Before I could answer, the little girl's voice came from behind me. "Mom!" I sighed and summoned Chun Tingting's soul. At first, I just wanted to confirm whether the little girl was her daughter and fulfill her wish of finding her mother. However, I didn't expect that I would summon Chun Tingting, who had become a ghost. The little girl walked out from behind me. She looked at Chun Tingting with puzzled eyes. At this moment, Chun Tingting was stirred up. She wasn't happy, but angry. Her shrill voice screamed, "It's you, you little bastard! You've grown so big already. I had to kill myself because of you, you little bastard." While cursing, she struggled to get closer to me. However, I guess she saw the peach would branch in my hand. She moved her body a little and then stopped. The little girl wanted to go to Chun Tingting, but she was so scared that she hid behind me. She peeked her head out and looked at Chun Tingting in fright. After listening to Chun Tingting, my first question was answered. This little girl should be the baby I had seen that year. However, Chun Tingting's behavior puzzled me. From what she had said, she had blamed her daughter for her death. She hated her daughter a lot. However, she had become a ghost and swallowed many souls. If she hated her daughter that much, why didn't she come and swallow this little girl? I pointed at Chun Tingting with the peach branch and asked her the question in my mind. Chun Tingting sneered and gazed at the little girl hiding behind me. Her voice was filled with hatred. "Do you think I don't want to? I've tried so many times over the years, but this little bastard isn't like me. I can't swallow her. She will grow up. She's neither a human nor a ghost." Neither a human nor a ghost? I had a vague idea in my head. However, before I could figure it out, Chun Tingting scolded again. "You have 3 souls, but you're still an idiot. You've been guarding this toilet for so many years, but you've never swallowed a soul. All 3 souls are there." A bolt of lightning flashed in my head. The death scripture had mentioned that there was a kind of fetus that died the moment its 3 souls were formed. After its death, there was a chance that its heaven soul and earth soul wouldn't scatter. It would become a ghost with 3 souls. Only this kind of ghost with 3 souls could be like the little girl. After its death, its soul could continue to grow. When I read about this kind of ghost in the book, I didn't think that I would encounter one. The probability of this kind of ghost forming was so low that the death scripture called it a heavenly fetus. This kind of ghost with 3 souls was very precious to a geomancer. Most of the feng shui masters have little ghosts that can help them do a lot of things, and this kind of ghost is the most precious kind of ghost. Ordinary ghost, no matter what, is still a ghost, but this kind of ghost, the 3 souls are no different from people. Raised well for feng shui masters, it has endless magical use. After calming myself down, I didn't think about it anymore. I turned to Chun Tingting and asked, "You've harmed a lot of people these years. I won't ask about the things I don't know, but I want to know what you did with Su Ziyu." "Su Ziyu?" Chun Tingting asked back. It was obvious that she didn't know who Su Ziyu was. I pointed at the little girl. "The girl she brought to the toilet a few days ago." Chun Tingting's ghost laughed. "You're talking about the girl she treated as her mother. It's quite a coincidence. I've been keeping an eye on that little b asterisk starred all these years, trying to find a chance to kill her and make her soul scatter. Who knew that before I could find a chance, she brought me a pregnant girl? She might know that I love pregnant girls the most these years. I'll pester them and make them kill their babies, just like I did back then. Then I'll swallow the soul of the newborn baby. TSK, TSK. After the baby dies, the adults won't be able to get over it. I'll tell them to kill themselves. That way, they'll be like me back then, and I'll have another serving of food." While talking, she smacked her lips as if she was reminiscing about something delicious. She seemed to be in a frenzy. My heart tightened. I stared at her and asked, "Answer my question. Why was there your blood on Su Ziyu's bed?" Chun Tingting's ghost giggled. "Because I gave birth to that little b asterisk starred in the wash basin. That's why I put the wash basin on her bed and waited for her to get the baby out." When Chun Tingting died, she was trapped in her own obsession. Over time, she formed this kind of crazy thinking. She wanted to kill all pregnant women, and she wanted to be like herself. First, she let others abort the child, and then she regretted it and committed suicide. Chun Tingting must have been involved in Su Ziyu's case from the beginning. However, when I arrived, she had already disappeared. The thickening energy in the dormitory wasn't caused by the little girl who had no intentions of harming anyone. It was Chun Tingting. However, there was one thing I didn't understand. When I saw Su Ziyu that day, she wasn't covered in yin energy. I used to think that only the little girl had interacted with her, and that the little girl didn't have any intentions of harming anyone. However, Chun Tingting was also involved. How could Su Ziyu not have yin energy? When I asked Chun Tingting, she giggled and said, "I have to kill the fetus in her stomach before I let her die." After listening to her, I exhaled in relief. Then, I suddenly thought of something. My face changed, and I glared at Chun Tingting. "You did something to the baby in her belly?" Chun Tingting licked her lips and sneered. "Her uterus is full of yin energy. The moment the baby is born is the moment the baby dies." It had been a week since Su Ziyu had encountered that strange incident. It was fine if the yin energy stayed in her body for a short period of time, but it had been a long time. It was hard to get rid of it. Chun Tingting was still laughing crazily. I didn't want to talk to her anymore. I took out a box made of locust wood and put Chun Tingting's soul inside. Then, I used cinnabar and water to suppress it before closing the lid. I had seen Old He use paper dolls to preserve souls, but I didn't have that kind of power yet. I could only use the locust wood box to store the soul. Locust wood was used to hide ghosts, and it was the simplest tool to seal souls. After dealing with Chun Tingting, I called the little girl and asked her, "Do you want to go with me?" Although the little girl didn't know much about the world, Chun Tingting's words made her understand a lot. She cocked her head and thought for a long time. Eventually, she nodded and agreed. She had two big, bright eyes, so I named her Tong Tong. Tong Tong's remains could be found in the sewer of the toilet. Her body was already there. However, I still had the jade bracelet that Red Shadow had used to possess her, so Tong Tong could temporarily stay there. The next day, Su Ziyu came to me and thanked me. "After my talk yesterday, I've made up my mind. I want to talk to my family and keep the baby." Chapter 32. Su Ziyu had a faint smile on her face. She looked completely different from before. She looked less gloomy, but more hopeful and brave. Although her voice sounded weak, I could imagine how much courage it had taken for her to make this decision. However, the yin energy in her womb wasn't something that could be dispelled with courage. The timing that Chun Tingting's spirit had chosen was too coincidental. It happened to be the time when the fetus' three souls were formed, and the yin energy had invaded the fetus soul. The yin energy would grow and nourish the fetus soul until it reached its peak at the moment of birth. The fetus would be born on a yin day and a yin hour. It would die right after birth. At the same time, it would give birth to a yin ghost. Unless they met a real geomancy master, there was no way to save the fetus. Let alone the fact that I hadn't comprehended Chiet. Even if I did, the chance of saving the fetus wouldn't be more than 10%. From a rational point of view, I had to persuade Su Ziyu to abort the child. It was the best choice. However, yesterday I had tried my best to persuade her to keep the child, but today I suddenly changed my mind and asked her to abort the child. What was going on? I didn't dare to persuade her directly, so I tried my best to tell her that the blood on her bed was Chun Tingting's ghost blood. It had a lot of yin energy, and it could affect the fetus in her womb. Moreover, she still had to finish her studies, so she had to think twice before making a decision. Su Ziyu looked at me in surprise. "Didn't you ask me to keep the child yesterday? Why did you change your mind today?" I shook my head. I didn't know that the yin energy had affected the child. If he were healthy, of course, I would fight for him. However, he was infected with yin energy in the womb. If you insisted on giving birth to him, it wouldn't be fair to you. Then, I looked at her abdomen. I could faintly feel the yin energy lingering there. At this moment, Su Ziyu suddenly laughed. "Little Zhou, I understand what you mean, but ever since you brought me to see that little girl yesterday, I've already made up my mind. No matter what, I can't let my child become like that. No matter if he's healthy or disabled in the future, he's still my child. I can't deprive him of his life because of me. You don't know, when that little girl hugged me and called me mommy last night, my heart broke. It was then that I realized how stupid I was to want to kill my own child. The more difficult the choice was, the more resolute the decision would be." Su Ziyu's eyes were resolute. She smiled and said, "Moreover, Medical science is very advanced now. I've checked a few times during the pregnancy. If there's any problem, we could do an ultrasound to find it. We don't need to worry about it now. Suzu's way of thinking was normal for ordinary people. However, a child with energy in his soul wouldn't have any problems before he was born. At most, he would be weaker than a normal fetus. Only during the birth would there be problems. I knew I couldn't persuade Suzu anymore. Unwilling to give up, I asked, "What if, and I'm just saying what if, the child dies when he's born?" Suzu looked at me suspiciously. However, she quickly regained her firm expression. "Xiaozhou, I know you're not an ordinary person, but you don't need to persuade me anymore. The child might have his own fate, but I'm a mother. I have to do what a mother should do. Even if it's like what you said, that the child won't live after he's born, I will still persist. Even if he can only see the world once after he's born, he has seen the world. I can't leave him with no hope at all." After listening to Suzu, I quieted down. I suddenly felt that Suzu's way of thinking was correct. No matter how young a life was, it had the right to live. Perhaps some tragedies were destined to happen, but we couldn't let them happen ahead of time, just because we knew about them. Just like what Suzu had said, even if he could only see the world once, he had seen it. I had to leave him with hope. At first, I wanted to persuade Suzu, but I didn't expect that she would be the one to persuade me. However, I also made up my mind. I had to study the death scripture even harder. If I could understand the existence of Qi before she gave birth, perhaps I could increase her hope a little. Since Suzu's pregnancy was about to show, she would attract a lot of criticism in the school. After talking to her family, she decided to leave school at the end of the semester. Before she left, I asked for her address. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to contact her after she went home. Fortunately, her house was in the city, which was close to the school. If something happened, I could get there immediately. It was already the end of my first year, and it was summer break. I didn't go home and stayed in the school alone. I focused on studying the contents of the death scripture, hoping that I could understand the existence of Qi as soon as possible. Staying in the school alone was a little boring. However, whenever there was no one around, I would call Tong Tong out to keep me company. That way, I wouldn't feel lonely. The power of extreme yang during the day was very harmful to ghosts. Normally, ghosts couldn't appear during the day. However, Tong Tong's 3 souls were still present, so she wasn't affected. She could appear at night or day. I also asked Tong Tong why she used to hide in the toilet and never come out. Tong Tong said that she had appeared in the toilet before, but the people who saw her were afraid. She didn't want to scare them, so she kept hiding there. It wasn't until she thought of Suzu as her mother that she went to find Suzu. The more I interacted with Tong Tong, the more I could feel the kindness in her. This kind of kindness wasn't like humans. After receiving education and understanding the truth, they would restrain themselves and form kindness. She was born kind, and she didn't want to bring harm to others. Perhaps this was the so-called pure heart of a child. Geomancy masters also had a way to raise ghosts. The simplest way was like what Chun Tingting's ghost had said, which was to swallow other souls to strengthen itself. This method was suitable for both the ghosts raised by geomancy masters and the wandering ghosts in the natural world. It was the law of the jungle, where the strong preyed on the weak. Naturally, powerful ghosts could be born. However, this method had a lot of uncertainty, and the strengthening speed was very slow. Heaven and earth had its own rules, and ghosts were creatures that defied the laws of heaven and earth. Weak ghosts would vanish in a short time, while the strong ones could only resist for a few more days. Ghosts that relied on this method to strengthen themselves couldn't escape the fate of vanishing in the end. Ancient geomancy masters had gone through a lot of trials and tribulations to find a way to raise ghosts. Different geomancy schools used different methods. The Death Scripture recorded a method to raise ghosts. It was called the art of connecting with gods. According to the book, ghosts exist for a reason. If you practice this method, you can connect with gods. Tong was lucky that she had 3 souls. Otherwise, with her kind nature, she wouldn't have swallowed other souls. Otherwise, she would vanish in a short time. However, even if she had 3 souls, she couldn't stay in this world forever. After she stayed with me, I copied the art of connecting with gods from the death scripture. When I had free time, I read it to her. Not long after that, I found that Tong's body had become more solid. She didn't have the illusory feeling of a soul anymore. She looked just like the red shadow. However, Tong didn't seem to be interested in cultivating the art of connecting with gods. She didn't like to stay outside all day. She would return to the jade bracelet if she had nothing to do. She said that it was very comfortable and fun to stay inside. I felt strange. It's just a jade bracelet where a soul lives. How could it be fun to stay inside? I asked her several times, but Tong always smiled and told me that she couldn't tell me. This made me even more puzzled. Tong was an extremely naive child. In principle, she wouldn't hide anything from me. Why? Out of curiosity, I often guessed the reason and asked her, "Tong, is there something in there that can harm me? Is that why you don't want to tell me?" Tong's eyes curved. She smiled and shook her head at me. "Is it because there's a lot of delicious food in there, and you're afraid that I'll go in and take all the food? Is that why you don't want to tell me?" Tong opened her eyes wide and shook her head again. She didn't understand the word delicious food. I racked my brain and thought of many different reasons to ask her. Tong, without exception, shook her head at me with a silly smile. In the end, I was so angry that I asked her, "Is there someone who doesn't want you to tell me what's in there?" This time, Tong didn't smile. She carefully looked at me. She looked as if she wanted to shake her head and nod at the same time. She looked so cute. I couldn't stay calm anymore. Why was there someone else between Tong and me? It felt as if there was a third party between us. I asked her who she was, but Tong didn't tell me. She used her small head to rub against my chest. I didn't know what to do, so I had to give up. During the summer vacation, Tong's body had changed a lot. She had completely solidified. If ordinary people saw her, they would only think of her as a little girl. They would never think that she was a little ghost. I had even bought all kinds of clothes for her to wear. In the past, Tong couldn't wear clothes. She had been wrapped in a bedsheet when her body had died. Her soul had also been wearing it. If I wanted to change her clothes, I had to burn the yellow paper with her birth information. Then, I had to chant the changing clothes spell. It was one of the derivative spells that geomancy masters could use to raise ghosts. Chapter 33. I learned about Su Ziyu's case through my classmates in the e-learning society, and the e-learning society was the one who'd brought the situation around. Not long after the new semester started, Dainan Zhou came to me and excitedly told me that the e-learning society had invited a feng shui master to give a speech at our school. He wanted me to go with him. This kind of thing was very common. The various societies in our school would try their best to invite famous scholars to give speeches. The E-Study Society had held this kind of activity before. However, I was disappointed when I went to see it. It wasn't because the people they invited were all swindlers. It was because the so-called feng shui masters they invited were all theoretical people. In other words, they were at the same level as me. They knew a lot about feng shui, but they hadn't reached the next level yet. They didn't understand the existence of qi, and they didn't have an ability like old he's. That was why I wasn't interested after hearing Dainan Zhou's words. However, he immediately told me that the person they invited wasn't simple. He was an honorary professor from a famous university in our country, and he was also the vice president of our city's Feng Shui Association. The former title sounded powerful, but I wasn't interested in it. I was more interested in the latter title. I vaguely remembered that when old he came to our school, the principal had called him President He. Although I didn't know if old he was a member of this Feng Shui Association or not, Dainan Zhou's words reminded me of him. I followed Dainan Zhou to the school's auditorium and met Professor Deng Meng. As soon as I saw him, my eyes brightened. It wasn't because he looked like an immortal. In fact, he was skinny, with a long face and triangular eyes. He looked really strange, but when I saw him, I got the same feeling I had when I first saw old he. It was a strange feeling, and I couldn't describe it. However, it made me excited. After I sat down, I heard Professor Deng talking about the feng shui of a house in the yang and a house in the afterlife. He also talked about the usage of luo jing. When I heard the words luo jing, I felt that it was more reliable. Luo jing was actually a compass. Traditional feng shui masters usually talked about luo jing. However, for some reason, people in modern times only talked about compasses and rarely talked about Luo Jing. As for feng shui and geomancy, Professor Deng's lecture was also very interesting. However, there were too few people who could understand it. No one was interested in it. After the lecture was over, the students from the Yi Shui Society stood up to ask questions about ghosts and spells with great interest. I also pricked up my ears. When we talked about ghost spells, it was hard to avoid the topic of Professor Deng's experience in dealing with ghosts. Was he just an ordinary geomancer or a skilled geomancer like Old He? It was recorded in the death scripture that after comprehending qi, a feng shui master would be able to grasp many extraordinary abilities. At this time, a feng shui master could be called a geomaster. While answering the student questions, Professor Deng quickly talked about talismans. He also mentioned that he made talismans with qi at this moment. I was sure that Professor Deng was a feng shui master who had mastered qi. I couldn't help but feel excited. Professor Deng was the first real geomancer I had met since I started studying the death scripture. Instinctively, I stood up and asked, I heard that a feng shui master must be able to control the qi in the air to draw it into a talisman and create a real talisman. I wonder if Professor Deng can tell me how to control the qi in the air? Since I was just asking, it wasn't too abrupt. As soon as I asked this question, all the students' eyes sparkled. They all gazed at Professor Deng. Not many people in the Yi Shui Society were interested in boring feng shui knowledge. Most of them were influenced by movies and TV shows. Their minds were filled with thoughts of catching ghosts and controlling corpses. Naturally, they were interested in making talismans. Professor Deng glanced at me. It seemed he didn't want to talk about this. However, he simply answered while the crowd was still clamoring. Everything in this world is inseparable from yin and yang. One creates and one transforms, and the other intersects with the xian and the huang. When one receives and the other receives, they connect from the top to the bottom. That is qi. You said that you can control qi, which is yin and yang. In the death scripture, the description of qi was gentle and serene. There is essence. Because it enters the primal chaos, it is called Tai Chi. Because it is the beginning of one's creation, it is called Xiantian. Because yin and yang haven't separated, it is called qi. It wasn't much different from Professor Deng's description. However, I didn't quite understand what he meant when he said, controlling qi means controlling yin and yang. I asked, what if someone can feel the yin and yang energies but can't feel the qi? What should we do? Of course, I was referring to me. I could feel yin and yang. For example, when I went to the girls' dormitory's toilet, I could feel that the place with the densest yin energy was in the inner cubicle. However, I was still confused about qi. After asking this question, Professor Deng furrowed his brows and looked at me with a bit of bewilderment. After a while, he opened his mouth and said, Student, your question itself is wrong. Heaven and earth use primal chaos as the qi, and my body uses the qi of the underworld as the qi. Qi is an intangible thing, so how can I feel it? I was dumbfounded. I couldn't feel qi at all? Then why did the death scripture say that one had to comprehend qi to become a geomaster and draw qi into talismans to create talismans? While I was still puzzled, Professor Deng said, moreover, qi isn't something to be felt. It's something to be used. As long as a geomaster can feel yin and yang, they can use it. This is the qi drawing talisman. Yin energy is qi, and yang energy is also qi. If you draw yin and yang energy for your own use, you can control qi. After hearing what he said, I was suddenly enlightened. It turned out that I had been walking the wrong path for a long time. Qi was something intangible, and I couldn't feel it. As long as I could control yin and yang energy for my own use, I could use all the skills of a geomaster. In other words, I was already a geomaster. I just needed to slowly familiarize myself with the incantations and talismans. As expected, his words woke him up. Although the death scripture recorded all sorts of things, there were some obscure areas that would be too difficult to comprehend on his own without someone to lead the way. The problem that had been bothering me for a long time was finally solved. I was grateful to Professor Deng, but I didn't want to tell him about it. I was still a layman in the circle of geomasters, so I had to be careful. However, after he finished his speech, I went to see him. It wasn't to thank him, but because of Su Ziyu. I knew that even if I became a geomaster today, it was still impossible to solve Su Ziyu's problem. It would be better to ask Professor Deng for help. At first, I was worried that Professor Deng wouldn't agree to help me. However, after I told him about the previous incident, he agreed immediately. Moreover, he asked me for the details of the previous incident. Of course, I wouldn't tell him everything. After all, the death scripture had mentioned that Tong Tong's soul was extremely precious. It could attract the greed of other geomasters. Moreover, I didn't want to expose my secret. I told Professor Deng, last time we only saw 2 ghosts. From their conversation, we learned that Su Ziyu's child had been infected with Yin energy. We didn't know anything else. Professor Deng's enthusiasm was completely different from his appearance. Not only did he agree to help Su Ziyu, but he also asked us to take him to the female dormitory. He said that he was worried that the ghosts hadn't left yet, and he didn't want to hurt the students. We took him there. However, Chun Tingting's soul was in my locust wood box, and Tong Tong's soul was in the jade bracelet on my neck. Professor Deng had spent a lot of effort, but he didn't find anything. When we returned, Professor Deng was disappointed. I didn't pay much attention to him, but later on, Dai Nanzhou told me that he had gone to the female dormitory several times. It seemed he was very concerned about this case. This made me admire this skinny Professor Deng even more. Only a geomaster like him, who took care of ordinary people as his duty, deserved the title of master. After several fruitless visits, Professor Deng gave up. He contacted me and asked me to visit Su Ziyu together. According to the address, Professor Deng and I went to Su Ziyu's house. Her child was 5 months old. When we arrived, Su Ziyu told me that she had gone to the hospital for an ultrasound scan. The doctor said that although the child was weak, there was nothing wrong with him. Everything was normal. This situation wasn't out of my expectation. However, I wasn't worried anymore. With Professor Deng here, the chance of saving this child would be much higher. Indeed, after checking for a while, Professor Deng said that he was confident that he could save this child. Then, he left an ornament that I didn't know what material it was. He asked Su Ziyu to keep it with her and come back when the child was born. I didn't understand Professor Deng's methods, but I didn't ask. Different geomasters had different inheritances, and it was one of their secrets. I shouldn't pry. After that, Professor Deng left the university. However, he left me his business card and asked me to pay attention to the female dormitory. If something strange happened, I must inform him. Moreover, when Su Ziyu gave birth, I must call him. Because of these 2 things, he deliberately told me that he would stay in the city for a while and wouldn't go out. No matter how I looked at it, Professor Deng was a man of noble character. I also respected him a lot. However, the strange thing was that the night after Professor Deng left, Tong Tong, who didn't like to come out of the jade bracelet, suddenly came out. She said to me in a serious tone, "Brother, that old man wasn't a good person. Don't contact him anymore, okay?" Tong Tong, how did you know that Professor Deng wasn't a good person? Tong Tong's big eyes looked scared. I don't know, but I'm sure he's a bad person. Brother, you have to believe me. All right. I rubbed Tong Tong's hair and said lovingly, "Tong Tong, don't worry. I'll try to contact him as little as possible." Although I said that, I felt that Tong Tong was a ghost and Professor Deng was a feng shui master. That was why she said that, because she was afraid of Professor Deng. Around 1 month after Professor Deng left, something strange happened at the university. However, it didn't happen in the female dormitory. It happened in the teacher's apartment. According to Dai Nanzhou, a 1-year-old child fell from the roof of a professor's house in the teacher's apartment and died on the spot. It wasn't strange for a child to fall from the roof, but after the professor's house had a child, all the windows were equipped with special guardrails to protect the child. Normally, the child wouldn't be able to climb out of the window. However, it happened. The professor's house was equipped with surveillance cameras. When I checked the surveillance footage, I found a strange scene. At that time, The baby's crib was placed next to the windowsill, and the sleeping baby crawled out of the crib. He crawled along the guardrails and slowly climbed to the top. Then, he stood on the guardrails of the stroller. A 1-year-old child couldn't walk yet, and he couldn't even stand on his own. However, this child stood on the guardrails of a stroller, which weren't even 2 centimeters wide. What was even more terrifying was that the baby then climbed up the railing to the windowsill. With a pair of small hands, he forcefully tore a hole in the iron railing outside the window. Then he crawled out and jumped down without hesitation. Chapter 34. After telling me the story, Dainanzhou wore a worried face. The E-Study Society is in an uproar. Everyone is saying that this is too strange. I'm sure there's a ghost behind this. President Huang wants to call me there to discuss this matter. Although I didn't show much knowledge about geomancy when the people of the E-Study Society were there, Dainanzhou was a blabbermouth. I was afraid that he had told others about my summoning of souls. Now, when the people of the E-Study Society saw me, they all looked at me with admiration. This time, they came to call me as soon as something happened. After listening to the story, I was also frightened. It wasn't because of the strange behavior of the child before his death. It was because this case wasn't as simple as Dainanzhou had said. Things like ghosts were usually formed after death with intense resentment. In addition, there were also special feng shui and other coincidental factors. No matter how they were formed, they were naturally evil, especially when they went against the heavenly path. They lived in a precarious situation. They had to swallow other ghosts to survive. Under such circumstances, ghosts would harm people. After killing them, they would swallow the victim's soul. That was why there were so many cases of ghosts harming people. However, even if those wandering ghosts wanted to harm people, they didn't have any powerful means. At most, they could bewitch people and confuse their minds. They could magnify the negative emotions in people's hearts and make them commit suicide. Back then, Chun Tingting had swallowed many ghosts, but her greatest ability was to use her Yin energy to harm the child in Suzy Yu's belly. She couldn't even use her Yin energy to harm Suzy Yu. According to Dainanzhou, this child was possessed by a ghost. However, it wasn't as simple as being bewitched by a ghost to commit suicide. From his behavior, such as climbing the guardrail of the baby bed and tearing open the iron window, these actions weren't something a wandering ghost could do. Unless, of course, he was a little ghost raised by a geomancy master. I went with Dainanzhou to the E-Study Society. I learned that this case had happened 3 days ago. Since we had reported it to the police, they had sealed the news. Now, it was only spreading in our school. It wasn't right or wrong for the police to block the news, but at least they could prevent it from causing too much panic. Furthermore, from President Huang's information, it seemed like our school wasn't the only one that had been murdered recently. Children's souls are the purest, and the little ghosts refined by them are more powerful. This is also the reason why feng shui masters call the ghosts raised by them as little ghosts. Except for some special cases, feng shui masters use the souls of children or even babies to refine ghosts. Like any other industry, there are good and bad people in the field of feng shui master. Some famous and upright feng shui master are bound by classic doctrines. They usually choose the children who died for some reason and ask the wishes of the ghosts. On the other hand, some unorthodox feng shui masters didn't have so many scruples. Often, in order to refine powerful ghosts, they would deliberately find some children with matching feng shui. After killing them, they would capture their souls. If it was just one case, it wouldn't be a big deal. The feng shui master who had done evil in the dark was just an ordinary feng shui master who had refined a little ghost. However, if it was a serial case, the feng shui master wouldn't be simple. He wouldn't only refine little ghosts, but also small ghost formations. Just like the other formations that feng shui masters could set up, the little ghosts that they raised could also set up formations. Just the formation methods of little ghosts recorded in the death scripture included the 6-ding protective formation, 5 ghosts moving technique, 3 souls killing formation, and dozens of other types. Even ordinary geomasters couldn't use the little ghosts to set up formations. Only feng shui masters with a higher cultivation base could use them. After understanding feng shui masters better, they would find that feng shui masters and ordinary people were like elephants and ants. Once a truly capable feng shui master wanted to harm people, ordinary people couldn't defend against it. If this case was really like what I had guessed, and it was done by a feng shui master with a high cultivation base, I was afraid this case would be left unsolved. Ordinary people couldn't deal with a feng shui master. I told the students of the East Study Society about my conjecture. Everyone quieted down. As people who had grown up in a society governed by law, they were indignant at the malicious act of depriving people of their lives. However, after learning about the horrible murderous deeds of feng shui masters, they were scared. Moreover, they felt powerless. Under such circumstances, what could they do even if they found the murderer? From a legal point of view, those children had committed suicide. There was no evidence that the murderer had killed them. Moreover, even if there was evidence, how could ordinary people arrest those feng shui masters? I was afraid that even the police couldn't do it. This kind of power that transcended the mortal world couldn't be controlled. After a long moment of silence, President Huang opened his mouth. Although we don't know the details, I'm sure the country has a way to control these people. Otherwise, if we let these people do whatever they want, the world would have been plunged into chaos. His words eased the silent atmosphere a little. Everyone excitedly discussed whether the country had a secret department that specialized in managing feng shui masters. After the discussion, the originally excited people calmed down. Whether there was a national department or not, this matter was too far away from us. This time, it was a case of life and death. It wasn't a small case like the one in the girls' dormitory. It wasn't something that the feng shui fans of the East Study Club could participate in. In the end, Dai Nanzhou was the smartest one. After a long moment of silence, he slapped his thigh and said excitedly, "I remember now, Professor Deng Ming. I saw the title Special Consultant of the Municipal Public Security Bureau on his business card. Do you think Professor Deng is from a government department?" When everyone heard this, they all cheered up. The more they talked about it, the more they felt that Professor Deng was from the mysterious department. Shortly after, they unanimously decided to contact Professor Deng. If the police department suppressed this case, people from Professor Deng's department wouldn't know about it. It would be the same as letting the murderous feng shui masters get away with murder. A 20-year-old university student might not have any abilities, but he had a strong sense of justice. After making the decision, we immediately took action. President Huang called Professor Deng. After the call went through, we explained the situation to Professor Deng. Professor Deng was as enthusiastic as ever. "I'll contact the Municipal Public Security Bureau and ask about the situation. Then, I'll come to our school to investigate." One day later, Professor Deng came to our school with 2 uniformed policemen. When we arrived at the school, Professor Deng came to find me. He asked me to go with him to the professor's house to check the crime scene. I was flattered. However, since I was curious about this case, I didn't think too much about it and followed Professor Deng. When we arrived at the teacher's dormitory, the building was cordoned off. We didn't hurry to go upstairs, so we went to check the crime scene first. The child's body had been moved away. There was only an iron rod as thick as 2 fingers left on the ground. There were dark bloodstains on the rod, which sent chills down people's spines. Professor Deng asked the 2 policemen about the crime scene. Then, the policemen showed us the photos they had taken at the scene. Professor Deng looked at the photos for a while, then gave them to me. "What do you think?" I took the photos and looked at them. What my eyes saw was always crueler than what my ears heard. The 1-year-old child looked like he was just standing there playing. However, there was a thick iron rod between his legs. The strange smile on his face formed a strong contrast with the bleeding 7 orifices on his face. It made people shiver in fear. What was even stranger was that the child was only wearing a red doo-doo. Both his hands and feet were wearing silver bracelets and anklets. This kind of dressing wasn't strange in ancient times, but nowadays, how could a child dress up like a lucky doll? I didn't dare to take another look. I returned the photos to the policeman and said, "Previously, I suspected that a geomancer had killed the child and captured his soul, turning him into a ghost. Now, it seems to be the case." Professor Deng nodded, then asked me, "In this school, you're the only geomancer. Have you seen any signs of other geomancers in the past few days?" During our time together, I didn't hide my knowledge of geomancers. It wasn't wrong for Professor Deng to say that I was a geomancer. I shook my head. I was afraid that only the geomancers of the East Study Society knew about geomancers. I hadn't seen anyone else. Professor Deng asked me again, "That day, you asked me about my understanding of qi. I'm guessing that you've also touched this layer, right?" I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. When I asked that question that day, I thought that my question was vague. But in fact, even a geomancer didn't know about drawing qi into a talisman. Since I was a student, it was obvious. Now that Professor Deng asked, it wasn't appropriate for me to hide it anymore. Professor Deng turned his head to look at me after I admitted it. There was a strange expression in his eyes. After looking at me for a while, his eyes calmed down, and he faintly said, "Since you've comprehended qi, you should have been trying to draw qi into a talisman to make talismans. Moreover, you've also been trying some other methods of a feng shui master." His question was a bit strange. While we were talking about the case, he suddenly changed the topic to me. Not only was it strange, but the two policemen standing not far from us also looked at Professor Deng in confusion. I nodded. What Professor Deng said was correct. I had been trying to make talismans for a while now. However, comprehending energy and actually using energy were two completely different concepts. Even after such a long time, I hadn't succeeded in making a talisman even once. At this time, Professor Deng suddenly sighed and asked in a faint voice, "Then, have you started raising ghosts?" Chapter 35. I lifted my head to look at Professor Deng. I was so shocked that I couldn't talk. After a long time, I calmed down and tried to speak. "I've thought about raising a ghost, but I haven't found the right opportunity." Professor Deng turned around to look at me. He gave me a faint nod, then went upstairs. Although he didn't say anything, the two policemen's faces changed. From time to time, they turned to look at me. Their eyes were full of vigilance. I didn't feel good. I had always respected Professor Deng, but now he had started to doubt me. It was the same feeling I had when I was a child, when my parents thought that I had done something wrong. We went upstairs to Professor Jiao Dongliang's house. Although it had been 3 days, it was still a sad thing to lose a son in a middle-aged man's life. Mr. and Mrs. Jiao still looked tired. After asking why we were here, Mrs. Jiao burst into tears. She didn't want to cooperate with us. Professor Jiao helped her back to her bedroom to rest. In the end, only Professor Jiao Dongliang came out to answer our questions. Since the police had done their investigation, Professor Deng was the one who came to ask questions. As soon as he opened his mouth, he asked about the child's birth date and horoscope. Professor Jiao was surprised. He asked the two policemen for Professor Deng's identity before answering the questions. After asking about the child's birth date and horoscope, Professor Deng squinted and moved his left thumb on his other 4 fingers to calculate. I knew it was a way to use the Luo Sutra. It used the palm to replace the Luo Sutra. It was very convenient to calculate the time of yin and yang. It was called the flipping trigram palm. I also calculated in my head. The child's birth date was on the yin day and the yin hour. It was the perfect embryo to refine a ghost. Then, Professor Deng asked if anything strange had happened to the child before the accident. Professor Jiao tried to recall for quite a long time. However, he only told me the things a child would do. There was no clue. When Professor Deng was about to leave, I couldn't help but interrupt him. "Did you guys dress the child up with the red doo-doo and the silver hoops on his hands and feet?" Professor Jiao was surprised. "My wife dressed him up. I'm busy with work, so my wife usually stays at home to take care of the child." Although I didn't know what was wrong with the red doo-doo and the silver necklace, I had a feeling that something was wrong. To verify it, I asked Professor Jiao to go back to his room and ask him. The answer surprised us. Professor Jiao was not the one who dressed the child up, nor was it his wife. Both of them thought that the clothes and the silver bracelet were bought by the other party. Originally, the two of them still had some doubts. However, after the incident, the two of them were too engrossed in grief and forgot about this matter. Then, we checked the surveillance footage before the accident. 2 hours before the accident, we found that the child had climbed out of the stroller and ran to the blind spot of the surveillance camera. When he came back, his one-piece baby outfit had turned into a red doo-doo, and there were silver rings on his hands and feet. This was the only valuable clue we had found today. I was shaken. I wanted to find the exact location of the kid according to the surveillance footage. At this moment, Professor Deng called me and urged me to go back. It's useless to investigate the red doo-doo. At most, it can prove that it's a necessary procedure of the soul capturing ritual. It can't help us find the geomancy master who raised the ghost. I felt strange. I didn't know why, but I felt that Professor Deng's attitude was perfunctory. He had only asked for my birth date and the 8 characters of a horoscope, which had already been asked by the police. It was impossible for us to find any clues. Now, as soon as I found some clues, he urged me to go back. However, I resisted the urge to ask more questions. I stood up and followed Professor Deng. No matter what, Professor Deng had invited me here. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to see the crime scene. If I follow my own ideas, I would offend Professor Deng. However, after we left, Professor Deng explained to me, "I'm here to check if the police have forgotten anything. When I was in Professor Jiao Dongliang's house, I didn't see any place with thick yin energy. We don't need to waste time here. We should check the child's body as soon as possible." He was right. The crime scene was only important when the police investigated the case. To a geomancy master, the body could reveal more secrets. I didn't think too much and followed Professor Deng to the forensic department of the Municipal Public Security Bureau. Professor Deng was the special consultant here, so he was familiar with the place. After the 2 policemen escorted us here, they left separately. After the policemen left, Professor Deng explained to me the question he had asked me about raising a ghost. He told me, after a case like this, as long as it's confirmed that a soul hunter was killed to create an imp, the police will immediately mobilize the people around the crime scene to find out who has the ability to create imps. Then, they will interrogate them one by one. Rather than letting the police find me in the future, it would be better to tell them now and let them investigate. It would save us a lot of trouble in the future. After listening to his explanation, I felt much better. I didn't feel wronged anymore. Then, Professor Deng filled in a form to apply for an autopsy. Since Jiao Dongliang and his wife had signed the agreement to perform the autopsy, Professor Deng submitted the form and took me to the freezer. We found the child's body. The real person was even scarier than the photos. Below the small body, there was a huge bloody hole. Blood flowed from the 7 orifices on his face. After being frozen, they looked like black and red centipedes crawling on his face. It was a horrifying sight. However, the scariest part was his eyes. They were still open, and as he lay there, no matter where I was, I felt as if his eyes were staring at me. Professor Deng had seen this kind of thing too many times. He didn't look surprised at all. After changing into a white surgical gown, he went to find a big bag of tools. I felt strange as I thought he was going to dissect the body. However, he opened the bag and took out an air tank with a nozzle. He also prepared a small glass bottle. I felt strange. "What do you want to do?" Professor Deng's answer surprised me. "I want to refine the child's corpse oil." Corpse oil was a kind of oily liquid that was secreted when a corpse was roasted. From the perspective of geomancy, corpse oil was very useful. However, it was usually used in evil geomancy rituals, such as the soul capturing ritual to raise a ghost. Corpse oil was the strongest material to restrain a person's soul. When a geomancy master wanted to restrain a person's soul, the easiest way was to refine the corpse oil and then restrain the soul. This method was foolproof. Moreover, after raising a ghost, the geomancy master would let the ghost live in the corpse oil. It was the best material for the ghost. Why did Professor Deng refine the corpse oil? I asked him in bewilderment. Professor Deng answered indifferently. The child's soul has been captured and refined into a ghost. Summoning the soul won't work. However, if we refine the corpse oil, there's a chance that we can summon the ghost soul back. Although the geomancy master who raised the ghost used this cruel method to refine the ghost, the thing he used to house the ghost wasn't as good as the corpse oil in the child's body. As long as we could refine the corpse oil and use the soul summoning spell, we could forcefully take the ghost back from the geomancy master. After listening to his explanation, I understood everything. However, I didn't feel right. I had an instinctive aversion to this cruel method. Professor Deng turned on the gas tank. There was a special ignition device on the nozzle, which spurted a light blue flame. He aimed the nozzle at the boy's chin, which had a lot of fat. He didn't let the hot flame touch his skin. Instead, he placed the nozzle about 2 or 3 centimeters away from his skin. Shortly after, the boy's frozen body, which had turned purplish-gray, slowly turned rosy. A few minutes later, the roasted parts of his body became smooth and shiny. Right at this moment, I smelled the aroma of roasted meat. Instantly, my stomach convulsed, and I couldn't help but retch. Fortunately, I had been busy for a long time and hadn't had time to eat. Otherwise, I would have vomited already. Professor Deng turned around and shot me a faint glance. He didn't say anything and lowered his head to concentrate on refining the corpse oil. From the beginning to the end, his face didn't change at all. I suspected that he had done this kind of thing many times and had gotten used to it. However, I remembered that corpse oil was used to perform evil rituals. I was sure that Professor Deng didn't refine this kind of thing often. After being roasted for about half an hour, some fine oil began to seep out of the pores on the surface of the glistening skin. A few minutes later, the oil particles grew bigger and combined into a big drop of corpse oil. It slowly slid down the boy's skin and fell into a small glass bottle that Professor Deng had prepared. Around 1 hour later, Professor Deng had collected about half a bottle of corpse oil. Then, he turned off the flamethrower, wrapped the boy's body, and put it into the freezer. I didn't have to hold my breath anymore. I took a deep breath, but the smell of roasted meat still lingered in the air. I couldn't help but retch a few times. After collecting the corpse oil, Professor Deng took out a few small bottles. They were also filled with different kinds of oily substances. However, they looked a little yellow, and they smelled rancid. He didn't explain to me and just poured them into the bottle of corpse oil. After shaking the bottle a few times, he took out a small yellow paper doll and stuck it on the bottle. There was a line of words on the back of the doll. Professor Deng's body was blocking the yellow paper, so I couldn't see the words. I thought it was the boy's birth date and 8 characters, so I didn't pay much attention to it. But coincidentally, there was a mirror behind the place where we were standing. I turned around and saw the words written on the yellow paper doll in the mirror. Chapter 36. When I saw Tong Tong's 8 characters on the yellow paper, I panicked. I had a bad premonition. Professor Deng placed an incense burner on the table and lit 3 joss sticks. He was about to perform the soul summoning ceremony. I couldn't help but call him Professor Deng. Professor Deng turned around and narrowed his eyes. He looked at me with a sinister expression before asking, "What is it?" I didn't care about anything else. I braced myself and pointed at the yellow paper on the bottle. "Did you write the wrong date of birth?" Professor Deng slowly turned his head and looked at it. He said calmly, "Oh, I did write the wrong one. This is the 8 characters of the baby girl in the toilet that you mentioned last time." Although he said that, Professor Deng didn't want to take off the yellow paper. He slowly prepared the last thing for the soul summoning ceremony. I didn't know what Professor Deng meant, but I still had a bad premonition. I asked him, "Professor Deng, don't we need to change the 8 characters?" Professor Deng didn't pay attention to me. After he had prepared everything needed for the soul summoning ritual, he calmly turned to me and said, "I forgot to tell you. A few days ago, I went to your school and found a bit of the baby girl's remains in the women's washroom. The bone powder was one of the things I added to the bottle just now. According to you, the baby girl disappeared. I'm afraid she found a place to hide. To prevent the baby girl from harming people again, I planned to use her bone powder to summon the soul back. I planned to summon the child's soul first, then the baby girl's. However, since I got the wrong 8 characters, I'll summon the baby girl's soul first. His words made my heart jump. The last time I told him about it, I was very careful. I wanted to hide the fact that Tong Tong was a natural fetus. However, Dainan Zhou, Suzy Yu, and the others had all seen Tong Tong's appearance at that time. As long as Professor Deng analyzed the situation before and after, it would be very easy for him to discover this matter. After investigating, he didn't find anything, so he left. I thought he had forgotten about it. I didn't expect that he would go and find Tong Tong's remains. I was even more panicked. Tong Tong had been dead for many years, and he didn't even have his bones left. The bones that Professor Deng had found were probably the last thing he had left. Just like the corpse oil, the bone powder in Professor Deng's hand was definitely the best material for Tong Tong to possess. Back then, it was also because of the jade bracelet left behind by the Red Shadow. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to take Tong Tong away without finding his remains. But now that Professor Deng had bone powder in his hands, if he really performed a soul-recalling ritual on Tong Tong, she would definitely be summoned from the jade bracelet. There was also a problem with the degree of fusion for the little ghost's host. The most suitable would naturally be the corpse oil, bone powder, hair, and other things from the corpse itself. At the very least, it would be the clothes that the little ghost had worn when it was alive. Although the jade bracelet left by the Red Shadow could help the little ghost possess it, compared to Tong Tong's remains, I didn't have any confidence in the jade bracelet. If Tong Tong was found, how could Professor Deng let her go? Tong Tong was always by my side, and I treated her like my little sister. I never forced her to do anything. However, if Professor Deng summoned her, he would turn her into a little ghost that could swallow other ghosts. With Tong Tong's personality, it would be worse than letting her soul vanish. While I was at a loss, Professor Deng suddenly said, "Last time, you summoned the ghost of the baby girl's mother. You should know how to summon the soul of this baby girl. You should summon the soul of this baby girl." Then, he leaned to one side and gave me the table. His eyes were still squinting as he looked at me. I didn't know what he meant, but I felt that he was hiding something. Instinctively, I found an excuse to reject him. The soul summoning technique requires different materials. I can't use the materials I have right now. According to the schools of feng shui masters, there were many types of soul summoning techniques, and they all required different materials. Professor Deng gave up. He returned to the incense burner table and read the soul summoning spell. His soul summoning spell was different from the one recorded in the death scripture. I didn't understand the specific content. It didn't seem to be the language we used, and it sounded mysterious and hard to understand. Along with his voice, a small whirlwind slowly rose from the incense burner with the 3 jaw sticks. At the same time, I felt the jade bracelet on my chest getting colder. I was so anxious that I kept praying to Tong Tong not to come out. After a long time, feng shui masters could form a tacit understanding with ghosts, and they could even communicate with each other. Although Tong Tong and I didn't have this kind of tacit understanding, I could only pray in my heart. Perhaps it heard my prayer, but the cold feeling on the jade bracelet disappeared, and it became calm again. Although I didn't know what had happened, I felt that Tong Tong wouldn't come out. At this moment, Professor Deng's soul-summoning spell ended, and the whirlwind in the incense burner disappeared. Professor Deng frowned and looked at the incense burner. Then, he turned to me and stared at me. His stare made me feel uncomfortable. A long moment later, he said, "I didn't expect that I wouldn't be able to summon the soul of the baby girl's mother. And now, I can't even summon the baby girl. The mother and daughter's souls have become spirits." He even went to Chun Tingting's corpse to summon her soul. However, I had subdued Chun Tingting's soul in the locust wood box. It would be strange if he could summon it. However, his words gave me goosebumps. It seemed he had a deeper meaning behind them. Professor Deng didn't give me time to think. He reached out his hand and tore off the 8 character on the small bottle. He put away the bottle containing the corpse oil and Tong Tong's bone powder. Then he took off his surgical gown. It seemed he wanted to leave this place. I was bewildered. Didn't he say that he wanted to summon the child's soul? Why did he suddenly put it away? After asking, Professor Deng absent-mindedly said, "My soul summoning technique failed once. I'm afraid I won't be able to summon the child's soul again. I'll wait until tomorrow." Then he got up and left. I followed him, but Professor Deng was nowhere to be seen. I didn't know where he had gone. His previous actions had made me very anxious. I didn't have a mood to look for him anymore. I hurried to return to the campus. When I arrived at the campus, I found a quiet place and held the jade bracelet. I called Tong Tong's name. After a few calls, a shadow flashed in front of me. Tong Tong appeared in front of me. I heaved a sigh of relief. Although Professor Deng had said that he had failed to summon the child's soul, I couldn't see through him today. I had to see Tong Tong to calm down. I asked Tong Tong, "Did you feel anything strange?" Tong Tong immediately nodded and said with some lingering fear, "I was in a daze just now. I heard someone calling my name, so I slowly followed the voice and almost came out of the jade bracelet. Later, big sister, big brother called me, so I woke up and quickly hid in it." I was bewildered. Did I just call her name? Tong Tong could hear what I said in my heart. I hurried to ask Tong Tong, "Does she know what I want to say to her right now?" Then, to verify it, I murmured in my heart, "Tong Tong, kiss me. Kiss me." Tong Tong tilted her head and thought for a while. Then, she blinked her big eyes and said, "I don't think so." I was a little discouraged. It seemed we still had a long way to go before we could connect our minds. However, since Tong Tong could hear my voice, I guess she wasn't far from being able to connect our minds. Just as I was about to tell Tong Tong to go back, Tong Tong put on a stern face and said in a critical tone, "Gidge, you promised me that day that you wouldn't contact that old man anymore. Why are you with him today? If I hadn't woken up, that old man would have called me away." I hurried to apologize to Tong Tong. At first, I thought that Tong Tong didn't like Professor Deng because of his identity as a feng shui master. But now that I thought about it, Professor Deng was coveting Tong. He wanted to find Tong Tong. Tong was right to dislike him. In the future, I would have to keep a distance from this sinister old man. After assuring me several times, Tong Tong snorted and accepted my apology. She didn't talk to me anymore and returned to the jade bracelet. The next few days were peaceful. Although I had decided to keep a distance from Professor Deng, I was still concerned about the progress of the previous case. Moreover, Suzi's problem hadn't been solved yet. No matter what, I had to maintain a good relationship with Professor Deng. Moreover, as a geomancer, it was normal for Professor Deng to covet Tong Tong, an extremely rare fetus. Although it made me uncomfortable, Professor Deng's behavior wasn't too bad. I didn't blame him. However, in the next 2 weeks, there was no news from Professor Deng. I called him, but he didn't pick up. This made me worried. Suzy had been pregnant for more than 9 months. I was afraid she could give birth at any time. If I couldn't contact Professor Deng by then, all my previous efforts would be in vain. While I was worried, the E-Study Society was still studying the previous case. One day, Dai Nanzhou called me over. When we were discussing the case, I mentioned the red doo-doo and the silver necklace that the child was wearing. Dai Nanzhou, who was quick-witted, asked if Professor Jiao and his wife didn't buy the red doo-doo and the silver necklace. Could it be that the geomancer sent the little ghost to his house? His question enlightened me. I had been thinking about the connection between the two items and the soul-capturing ritual, but I had never thought about how they had ended up in Professor Jiao's house. Dai Nanzhou's suggestion of sending the little ghost to his house wasn't true. Tong Tong was a rare fetus, and he had to practice the godhood technique to be able to put on clothes. The little ghost's strength was really weak. The red doo-doo was easy to explain, but the little ghost couldn't have sent the silver necklace to Professor Jiao's house. The silver necklace wasn't heavy, but it was very dense. The little ghost wouldn't be able to carry it. Thus, someone must have sent the two items to Professor Jiao's house. After I found this clue, I told the students in the E-Study Society. Everyone was excited, and they immediately split up to investigate. Since many of the students in the E-Study Society were in the student council, it was easy to find the surveillance videos in the school. In just one afternoon, Dai Nanzhou and the others had gathered all the surveillance footage from the teacher's apartment on the day of the incident. We checked the videos together. Soon after, I saw a familiar figure in the video. Professor Deng. Chapter 37. How could it be Professor Deng? Before checking the CCTV footage, I had never thought that I would see Professor Deng there. Although I was wary of him, it was because of Tong's case. I could understand why a feng shui master coveted a rare spirit like Tong. However, I had never thought that he would be involved in this case. At this moment, I remembered that when I found the red doo-doo and the silver necklace in Professor Jiao's house, Professor Deng had calmly stopped me from asking any more questions. Also, during the soul summoning ceremony in the forensics office, Professor Deng had said that he wanted to summon the spirit of that child. However, it turned out to be the spirit that summoned Tong. At that time, I was skeptical, but I had never thought that Professor Deng was the feng shui master who had killed the child and raised the spirit. What was even more unbelievable was that he had taken the corpse oil from the child. On the surface, it looked like he wanted to summon the spirit. However, if Professor Deng was the murderer, he would have taken the spirit vessel to raise the spirit. No wonder I had seen him refine the corpse oil so skillfully. Moreover, he had prepared a set of corpse oil extraction equipment in the forensics office. Perhaps his title as a special consultant in the forensics office of the Municipal Public Security Bureau was to make it easier for him to refine the spirit. On the one hand, he had used his metaphysical knowledge to kill the children, and on the other hand, he held a position in the Public Security Bureau. When the corpse was sent to the forensics office, it fell into his hands. Professor Deng's scheme was really cunning. This time, there were 4 cases of children's deaths in our city. Who knew how many had happened in the past? Moreover, if Professor Zhao's house didn't have surveillance equipment, no one would have noticed the strange behavior of the child before his death. No one would have guessed that it was the work of a feng shui master. After thinking about it, I felt a chill run down my spine. In the past few years, I had seen many terrifying ghosts and spirits. I had even seen skeletons and female corpses. However, those ghosts and monsters had only appeared to harm people. No one was like Professor Deng. While killing people, he lived a normal life. He was a university professor, the vice president of the Feng Shui Association, and he even held a position in the Public Security Bureau. Compared to ghosts and spirits, humans were the scariest. The students of the East Study Society were still discussing why Professor Deng had appeared in the surveillance footage. Only I was certain that he was the murderer. My heart was pounding, and I was scared and angry at the same time. So what if I can confirm that he's the murderer? Call the police? Moreover, Professor Deng had been working in the forensic department for many years. I was afraid that no one would believe my words. As for relying on myself, that's even more impossible. The reason why I was able to enter the Geomaster realm and comprehend the use of Qi was because of Professor Deng's words. I am currently an elementary Geomaster, but Professor Deng's realm is probably so high that I can only imagine it. What to do? Could it be that he could only pretend not to see it? Although I am a feng shui master, I am still a 20-year-old college student. My heart was warm, and my blood was boiling. The image of Professor Jiao's child's corpse was still floating in front of my eyes. How could I just stand there and watch without feeling anything? But if he really had to think of a way to deal with Professor Deng, what about Su Ziyu? I had persuaded her to keep the child in her belly. Professor Deng had been her only hope to keep the child. But now, when I thought of Su Ziyu, my heart shivered. No, Professor Deng killed so many children and refined them into little ghosts. How could a demon like him be kind enough to help me save the fetus in Su Ziyu's stomach? Moreover, the fetus was born with 3 souls that carried yin energy. It was the perfect body to refine little ghosts. I remembered the pendant Professor Deng had given Su Ziyu, and my face changed. That thing wasn't for the fetus. Perhaps it was a soul-capturing tool. I found an excuse to leave the Yishui Club and called Su Ziyu's family. I called her several times, but no one picked up. As I was getting more and more panicked, Su Ziyu's mother finally picked up the phone. As soon as I asked Su Ziyu, Mrs. Su cried and said that Su Ziyu was giving birth. I was startled. Su Ziyu was giving birth. Why didn't she contact me? Also, why did Mrs. Su keep crying? Before I could ask, Mrs. Su said, "The old man I brought last time is at home, and the child's condition isn't good." When I heard that, I felt my scalp tingle. Professor Deng hadn't shown up for a long time, and I thought that he had found out the truth, so he had run away. However, I didn't expect that he would go to Su Ziyu's house while she was giving birth. At first, I only suspected that he would do something to the fetus in Su Ziyu's belly. But now, after seeing his actions, I was afraid that he had already planned this. I didn't have time to ask. I only had one thought in my head, and that was to stop Professor Deng. Even if I couldn't save Su Ziyu's child like I had promised her, I couldn't just stand and watch Professor Deng raise the poor fetus into a little ghost. I hurried to call a taxi and gave the driver all the money I had. I asked him to take me to Su Ziyu's house as fast as possible. Around 20 minutes later, I arrived at Su Ziyu's house. Before I entered the house, I heard Su Ziyu screaming inside. I relaxed a little. Su Ziyu was still screaming. I guess she hadn't given birth yet. This child was a living fetus, and it would die as soon as it came into contact with yang energy. Perhaps it could still be saved. When I was about to knock on the door, I pushed it open. Su Ziyu's door wasn't locked, and it was pushed open. At this moment, I didn't have time to be skeptical and rushed into the house. There was no one in Su Ziyu's living room. I followed the sound and went to her bedroom. As soon as I pushed the door open, I saw Professor Deng sitting on a chair not far from the door. He was holding a teacup in his hand, calmly drinking tea. Su Ziyu was lying on the bed. Her face was covered in sweat, and her legs were spread apart. She was screaming that she was going to give birth. Except for the two of them, there was no one else in the room. Mrs. Su, who had answered my call earlier, was nowhere to be seen. I gazed at Professor Deng and enunciated each word. "Professor Deng, I don't care about other things, but I want to know if you can save Su Ziyu's child." Professor Deng calmly looked at me. His face was still as calm as ever. He said, "It seems that you already know something. Let's not talk about that for now. If you want to save the fetus, I can't help you. You'll have to rely on yourself." "You can't help me?" I tried to suppress my anger. "As long as you use a Yin talisman, you can temporarily remove the Yin energy in the child's body. It won't die from the collision of Yin and Yang energy. It will slowly recover in the future." "You said you can't help me?" Professor Deng slowly took out a red talisman and said calmly, "The last time you brought me here, I gave this girl a soul wood. After several months of nourishing, the baby's soul is very strong, and the Yin energy is also very strong. A Yin talisman can't remove it. You have to use this red talisman. Anyway, the child is about to be born. Once it's born, it will die when it comes in contact with Yang energy. This red talisman is useless." Then, he threw the red talisman to me. I caught the talisman and was a little shocked. The red talisman was a higher level talisman than the yellow talisman. It was extremely rare, and only a real master of metaphysics could draw it. In my mind, Professor Deng's power had risen to another level. However, I didn't understand his actions. Why did he give me the red talisman? Soon, Professor Deng answered my doubts. "I told you that if you want to save this child, you have to rely on yourself. This child can't stand Yang energy. After it's born, if you wrap it with a pure Yin soul and use this red talisman to slowly remove the Yin energy, the child will survive." Professor Deng squinted and looked at me. "Now that I've given you the red talisman, it's up to you whether you want to save it or not." I immediately understood what he meant. Wrap it with a pure Yin soul. It turned out he already knew that I had taken Tong Tong away. No wonder he had tried to summon Tong Tong's soul in front of me. He had even asked me to use the soul summoning technique. It was all to test me. The last test didn't work. This time, he gave me two options. I could watch Su Ziyu's child die, or I could call Tong Tong out and save the child. However, if Tong Tong came out with Professor Deng's power, he wouldn't let me take him away. What should I do? Who should I choose? Su Ziyu's child or Tong Tong? Before I could make a decision, The jade bracelet on my chest flashed. Tong Tong appeared in front of me. Her bright eyes curved into crescents as she smiled. Brother, why are you hesitating? Tong Tong is dead, but this little brother is still alive. If you can save him, Tong Tong will be very happy. Then, Tong Tong walked toward Suziyu. She waved at me, asking me to go there. At this time, Professor Deng stood up from his chair. His eyes, which had been squinting, widened a lot. He looked at Tong Tong with his shining eyes and exclaimed, "It's really a ghost baby. It's a blessing from heaven and earth." I gritted my teeth and didn't want to think too much. Suziyu's child was about to be born. If I could save one, I would save one. I hurried to Suziyu's side. At this moment, she screamed again. I could vaguely feel something coming out from under her body. Tong Tong reached out her hand. She couldn't hold the child, but she could wrap him up to block the yang energy. I gritted my teeth and held the red talisman in my hand. I chanted the calm heart mantra and got ready. Once the child was born, I would use the Een talisman on him. Wow, Suziyu's birth was smooth. A few minutes later, a baby boy was born. Tong Tong held him tightly. After coughing a few times, he cried for the first time. Suziyu was lying on the bed, exhausted. She seemed to have forgotten everything. She looked at the baby boy, and a smile slowly appeared on her face. I quietly drew my energy and prepared to use the red talisman in my hand. Right at this moment, Professor Deng's voice came from not far away. 5 Ghost Soul Attraction, Een's Spirit Return. Following his voice, Tong Tong let out a scream, and his body immediately flew out uncontrollably, flying directly in front of Professor Deng. The baby boy wrapped in her arms was thrown out. Before the first cry could be completed, it stopped abruptly. His eyes, which had just opened a slit, widened even more. No. Suziyu, who was on the bed, cried crazily and rushed to the ground. Her body that had just given birth couldn't stand it all. She relied on her 2 hands to hold onto the ground and crawled to the side of the baby bit by bit. She hugged the wide-eyed baby into her arms and let out a shrill cry. I stood next to her, my hand holding the red talisman, stiffening in the air. At this time, Professor Deng, who was standing at the side, used a strange rope to completely imprison Tong Tong's soul. He turned his head and said calmly, "I've already obtained this heavenly fetal ghost baby. Don't waste a red talisman. This thing is very precious." With that said, he clapped his hands and took out a small box from his bosom. He opened it and poured out some dark red powder. All right, the matter of giving birth is over. Next, let's discuss the problem of the ghost baby. He pointed at Tong Tong and said, "Last time, I used her corpse to summon her soul, but I still couldn't summon it. It seems her host is a little strange. Now, hand over her host. Oh, right, there's one more thing. I've investigated you before. You seem to have experienced something in high school. In just a few years, you've learned a lot about feng shui and metaphysics. I'm afraid you've had a fortuitous encounter. Hand over what you should. I won't make things difficult for you." At this moment, I finally woke up from the shock. Endless anger filled my heart. I looked at Professor Deng in front of me and hated that I couldn't die together with him. How much had Suziyu suffered for this child? For this child, Tong Tong didn't even hesitate and made the choice for me. However, after doing all that, Professor Deng just casually took Tong Tong away and killed the newborn baby boy. As for what he wanted from me, it was nothing more than the jade bracelet and the death scripture. I'd always thought that I was cautious enough, but I didn't think that I had any secrets in the eyes of this cunning demon. In my endless anger, I didn't care about the jade bracelet or the death scripture. If I could exchange these 2 items for the 9th heaven's divine lightning that could kill this bastard, I would have chosen to exchange them. However, no one gave me the chance to do so. Besides glaring at Professor Deng with bloodshot eyes, I couldn't do anything else. Seeing that I didn't move, Professor Deng sighed. He grabbed a handful of cinnabar from the box in his hand and gently threw it at Tong Tong. My eyes shrank. Tong Tong was an Een soul, and cinnabar was a yang item. I could imagine how painful it was to throw cinnabar at her soul. However, Tong Tong didn't scream. Her body shivered and she whimpered. At the same time, she whispered to me, "Brother, hurry up and leave. How could I leave at this moment? I bit the tip of my tongue and dashed toward Professor Deng. Since I just learned about the existence of Qi, my metaphysical power was like a baby in front of Professor Deng. At this moment, I could only rely on my bravery to fight him. However, after running a few steps, I felt a heavy blow on my face before I could even see anything clearly. My whole body flew backward. My eyes couldn't see anything and my head felt dizzy. I spat out a mouthful of blood. Professor Deng sighed again and said in a persuasive tone, "Why do you have to do this? Geomancy masters can attack each other casually. I didn't want to attack you." I lifted my head to look at Professor Deng, but my eyes couldn't see anything. I could only see some vague lights and shadows. I thought that with my bravery, I could rush forward and risk my life. Who would have thought that I would only die if I rushed forward? Am I going to die? The moment my vision darkened, I suddenly heard Tong Tong's voice. She seemed to have called me sister. Chapter 38. For the past few days, I've been criticized for not updating much. From today onwards, I don't have to worry about this anymore. This book is going to be published, and I will be able to update endlessly every day. Although it is set at 3 chapters a day, I will continue to update like crazy. As long as there are rewards, recommendation tickets, and diamond tickets, I will definitely update like crazy. I guarantee that there will be more chapters every day. So if you have tickets, please vote more. If you're in a hurry to read the book and don't lack money, you can also reward me. A jade pendant plus 1 chapter, a crown plus 10 chapters. Also, regardless of whether there are rewards or recommendation tickets, I will update 6 chapters for myself. Yes, that's right, I will be that willful. In addition to that, everyone should also understand that there would be a fee for the bookshelf. Each chapter would cost about 10 cents or so. It is not expensive, and it is cheap and affordable. To me, this book is like my own child. I have watched her grow up little by little, and today, she has finally become an adult. I did not expect everyone to praise her, but I hope that she will receive blessings. In the past 20 days, I did not ask for anything, but now I would like to ask for everyone's support. Regardless of whether it is voting or rewards, I hope that she will receive the greatest support. To this book, I am her mother. I created her, and you are her father. You raised her. On her coming-of-age ceremony, I hope that she will receive a sweet gift from her father. Every reader of my book is an angel. Regardless of whether you will continue to read after the fee, I sincerely thank you for your support of this book during this period of time. I remember saying I have read before. The beginning of a story is always like this. It happens at the right time, and you're caught off guard. The ending of a story is always like this. 2 flowers bloom, and we go our separate ways. I can't say anything too sentimental. I only hope that this unexpected meeting between us can last until we go our separate ways. Dear readers, I love each and every one of you. Next, I will explain the method of topping up on the website. Those who do not understand can take a look. 1. First, you need to register a Heiyin account. Heiyin supports one-click login. As long as you have a QQ, Baidu, or Sina Weibo account, you can use these accounts to log in a Heiyin. Registration is that simple. 2. Click on Top Up at the top of the web page and follow the top-up procedure. 3. Specific top-up method. BlackRock supports 6 top-up methods: online banking, Alipay, Tenpay, WeChat, mobile phone top-up card, GamePoint card, PayPal. Now, I will explain in detail how each of them can be recharged. Online banking. This requires you to open an online banking account to recharge. The recharge ratio is 1:100. 1 yuan is equivalent to 100 rock coins. WeChat. You can top up your WeChat account. Once you grab a red packet, you can look at it for a long time. The ratio is 1:100. Alipay. People with Alipay accounts can choose. The ratio is 1:100. Like Alipay, PayPal has a 1:100 ratio. Mobile phone prepaid card. This was the most convenient and fastest way to top up. Heiyin supported 3 types of top-up cards: Mobile Shinjo card, Unicom card, and Telecom top-up card. They can be found in newsstands, convenience stores, and supermarkets. The top-up ratio was 1:85, which was less than online banking because the mobile network would deduct some surgery fees from it. Game Point card. It was easy to buy, just like a mobile phone top-up card. However, Hey Yin only supported the following types of Game Point cards. The rest were not supported. They were Jun Wang e-card, Shengda game card, Journey game card, Q-coin card, Lonyu card, e-bao, NetEase card, Perfect World card, Soachanyu card, Zonyo card, Tinxia card, and Tianhong card. The top-up ratio was between 1:70 to 75. Please only purchase the above. The other Game Point cards were not supported. PayPal. This was specially prepared for overseas friends. I will not introduce it further. Finally, there was the problem with the Apple app. The top-up ratio was 150. It was not worth it. Therefore, students who use the app should not choose to top up. Go to the website and search for the Hey Yin website. Log into your account and use any of the methods listed above to top up. After that, you can log into your account on the app. The top-up ratio would be filled up and you could spend money normally. After top-up, reading would be the same as before. Every chapter you read would be deducted. It was not troublesome at all. It was best to activate automatic subscription. That way, every time a chapter was updated, the website would automatically deduct the fees. It was more convenient. Chapter 39. What's going on? Why did Professor Deng scream? I didn't have time to think about these things, as I quickly fell into a coma. When I woke up, I could finally see some light, but I still couldn't see clearly. I could vaguely feel someone pushing my body. I reached out my hand and tried to feel around. Soon, I heard a weak voice. Brother, are you awake? Then, I felt a cold and soft hand. I quickly asked, Tong Tong, is that you? How are you? Is Professor Deng still here? Tong Tong's voice sounded like she was crying. Brother, don't worry. I'm fine. That bad guy was chased away by Sister. Sister? Who is this Sister Tong is talking about? Is it the Red Shadow? But she had entered the giant door in the underground palace. How could she appear now? I asked Tong Tong, but Tong Tong said that Sister was Sister and she didn't know who she was. With Tong Tong's help, I sat up and leaned against the wall. I closed my eyes and began to chant the Tranquil Heart incantation. Grand Celestial Star, ever-changing. Exorcise evil spirits, bind spirits, protect your life. Wisdom is clear, the mind is calm. The three souls are eternal, the spirit is never lost. After chanting it 3 times, my heart calmed down. I felt the pain in my head lessen a little, but my eyes still couldn't see clearly. After resting for a while, I quietly felt the chi in the air. Then, I chanted the profound accumulation incantation. Cloud seal, the beginning of the calamity. Far and near, sinking and floating. Wandering in 5 directions, more than one zhang. The true emperor writes with the brush. First, the cave movement, then the book talisman. The primordial descends, the true text is born. Clear what is there, obscure what is not. Heavy illness can cure itself, dust and drowning can be helped. The netherworld will rely on it, ascending to the immortal metropolis. This was a talisman used to adjust one's body when making talismans. It could also dispel evil spirits, allowing the feng shui master to better draw qi into the talisman. Although I couldn't make talismans yet, chanting this incantation could use the power of qi to cure the diseases in my body. With my current ability, I could only chant the profound accumulation incantation once. Fortunately, after chanting it, my body gradually warmed up and my eyes could finally see. The hit on my face was probably the work of Professor Deng's little ghost. Little Demon had an evil nature and loved to attack people's eyes. If one's eyes couldn't see, the fear in one's heart would be magnified. Little Demon often used this method to harm people. For example, the commonly seen ghost hitting the wall, and so on were all similar methods. After chanting the profound accumulation mantra, one's chi could accumulate in one's body and get rid of all evil. After I recovered my vision, I looked around. I didn't see the Red Shadow, and Professor Deng was nowhere to be seen. Only Tong Tong and I were left in the room. Su Ziyu was lying on the ground, holding the dead baby boy in her arms. At this time, she had already stopped crying. Her eyes were lifeless, and she was paralyzed on the ground with a numb face. She looked extremely miserable. I blamed myself. What happened to Su Ziyu was all because of me. If I hadn't helped her, she would have had an abortion or been killed by the ghost. It would have been much better than watching her child die in her arms. I struggled to get up from the ground and wanted to comfort Su Ziyu. However, as soon as I came close to her, Su Ziyu acted like a mother cat protecting its cub. She jerked backward and hugged the baby boy's body even tighter. Her eyes angrily glared at me. I sighed. Su Ziyu wasn't awake yet. She would need time to recover. I pushed her back and asked Tong Tong about what had just happened. According to Tong Tong, the sister who had been living with her in the jade bracelet suddenly appeared and summoned a lightning bolt to strike Professor Deng. However, Professor Deng didn't die. After he was wounded, he ran away. After that, the sister that Tong Tong had mentioned also disappeared. Tong Tong, did this sister return to the jade bracelet? Tong Tong shook her head. No, she didn't. She said that the sister disappeared completely. She didn't return to the jade bracelet. Disappeared? The only thing that could live in the jade bracelet was Ein's soul. Ein's souls were afraid of yang energy, and heavenly lightning was the condensation of the yang energy in heaven and earth. The sister she mentioned could summon heavenly lightning. Even if she had injured Professor Deng, she would have been hurt badly. Was that the reason why she disappeared? My heart tightened. If she was the red shadow, I was afraid she was in danger. I asked Tong Tong, did this sister wear red clothes and a red veil? Tong Tong shook her head. She wore white clothes and didn't have a veil. I exhaled in relief. Since the red shadow had appeared next to me, she had been wearing the same clothes. If she didn't wear red clothes, she couldn't be the red shadow. However, I was even more confused. Why was there a ghost wearing white clothes inside the jade bracelet? When the red shadow gave me the jade bracelet, she told me that it was her host. She never told me that there was another soul inside. Moreover, when the red shadow was here, the jade bracelet was very cold. Even if it was summer, as long as I wore the jade bracelet, I wouldn't feel hot. However, after the red shadow left, the jade bracelet didn't have that feeling anymore. Only after Tong Tong entered the jade bracelet did the coldness return. However, it wasn't as cold as when the red shadow was here. Tong Tong, what's inside the jade bracelet? It's a big palace. She feels very comfortable in there, but she can only move around in a small area. She can't enter the other areas. That sister is the only person she has ever seen. She didn't tell me about it because of that sister's warning. Now, I was even more curious about this jade bracelet. Unfortunately, I was a human, and I couldn't enter the jade bracelet like a ghost. Unless I could follow the death scripture and become a geomancy master, I would be able to cultivate a yin or yang spirit, which would allow me to escape from my body. After resting for a while, I saw that Su Ziyu had calmed down a little. I went to comfort her. Su Ziyu didn't react as violently as before, but her face was still numb. She didn't listen to me. I had to stop trying to comfort her. The baby in your arms has passed away. The baby died as soon as he was born, and he has a lot of resentment. You have to give him to me and recite the rebirth mantra a few times to get rid of the resentment and bury him peacefully. Su Ziyu's face finally regained some energy when she talked about the baby. She slowly sat up and lowered her head to look at the baby in her arms. Her numb face glowed with motherly light, and the corners of her mouth curled into a smile. I told you, even if he died as soon as he was born, he's still got to see this world. So don't worry. He won't have any resentment. I know that. Looking at Su Ziyu's face, I felt even more upset. However, it didn't matter if he had resentment or not. As long as this baby was with her, Su Ziyu would always be in pain. I insisted on burying the baby as soon as possible. Su Ziyu seemed to be angry. She glared at me and said, "He's my baby. I won't bury him. I want to keep him with me." Keep it with me? But he's already dead. I looked at Su Ziyu's resolute face and felt that something was wrong. Many people who had lost their children didn't want them to leave, so they thought of all kinds of methods to keep their child's body with them. Some even used the power of a geomancy master to raise a ghost. This kind of situation was common in Southeast Asia. Did Su Ziyu have that kind of idea? However, I thought about it and felt that Su Ziyu wouldn't think of such a method. It was just something she said because she was too sad. When she calmed down, she would give her child the best place to go. Since Su Ziyu didn't agree to bury him, I couldn't force her. I had to give up and leave with Tong Tong. Before leaving, I purposely searched around Su Ziyu's house. Soon, I found her parents in the other bedroom. The old couple was pacing back and forth in the small bedroom. They looked confused. It was definitely Professor Deng's ghost. It had bewitched them and made them walk in circles in the bedroom, unable to get out. I walked over and shouted in front of them. The old couple immediately woke up from their bewilderment. As soon as they saw me, they asked me, "Why are you here?" They didn't wait for my answer and told me that Su Ziyu was giving birth. They wanted me to go with them. The old couple didn't know what had happened. I blamed myself even more. I didn't dare to look at them and just followed them to Su Ziyu's room. After walking over and seeing Su Ziyu and the baby boy in her arms, the old couple burst into tears and bawled. I couldn't bear it, but I didn't dare to talk to them. I gritted my teeth and left. Before I left, I turned around and saw Su Ziyu smiling in the midst of all the wailing and crying. She looked at the dead baby in her arms lovingly. Her mouth moved as if she was whispering something. Chapter 40. After that, I returned to school and didn't participate much in the East Study Society's affairs. Every day, I would attend classes and focus on studying the contents of the Death Scripture. According to Tong Tong, Professor Deng had escaped. Although he was injured, no matter how serious the injury was, he would recover one day. He definitely wouldn't let this matter go. After he recovered, he would definitely come and find me. The big sister Tong Tong mentioned had saved me once, but she had also disappeared. The next time Professor Deng came to find me, there would be no one to save me, and I could only rely on myself. Although Deng Meng was an animal devoid of conscience, he had helped me take a big step forward in the study of feng shui. After comprehending the true meaning of qi, I had been working hard to learn how to draw qi. In the beginning, I could only use a very small amount of qi, which was not enough to make talismans. At most, I could only use talismans like the profound accumulating incantation. However, as I became more familiar with the qi drawing technique, I was able to draw more and more qi. After leaving Su Ziyu's house for more than a month, when I used the qi drawing technique again, the qi I could draw wasn't as scattered as before. Instead, it formed a thin stream of qi. This was the qi drawing technique mentioned in the Death Scripture. After reaching this realm, one could be considered a real Earth Master and could try to make their own talismans. Moreover, they could use some truly powerful incantations. I immediately went to buy cinnabar, yellow talisman paper, and a weasel hair brush. These 3 items were essential to making talismans. Cinnabar was a pure yang item that could break eviline. However, the main reason for using cinnabar to make talismans wasn't to remove evil, but to condense qi. Real talismans needed to draw qi into the talisman to have a great effect. Cinnabar could lock qi and make the talisman more effective for a long time. The yellow talisman paper wasn't just any yellow paper. It was made from a plant called angel grass. Moreover, the newly made yellow talisman paper couldn't be used. It had to be stored for 3 years until the yellow talisman paper had some curved lines on it. Only then could it be used to make talismans. There is a saying in feng shui, wolf's hair and dog's blood can eliminate evil. This meant that wolf's hair and dog's blood had the same effect of eliminating evil. A brush made from wolf's hair was naturally extraordinary. These 3 items weren't easy to find. I had to go to the biggest antique market in the city to buy them from an old shop. At first, I didn't buy any yellow talismans. Before we left, the shop owner told me that he had some old paper and asked me to take a look. When I looked at the paper, I saw a cloud pattern on it. It was the yellow talisman paper I needed. At that moment, I learned that in the antique trade, the the yellow talisman paper was called lousy. These yellow paper talismans were not cheap. A stack of 5 talismans would cost 500 yuan. Since I was short of money, I could only buy 2 stacks of yellow paper. Together with the weasel hairbrush and the cinnabar, I spent almost 2,000 renminbi. If it weren't for the 10,000 renminbi that Director Lee had given me when I first came to the university, I wouldn't have enough money to buy these things. After buying the items I needed, I returned to the dormitory and started to make talismans. Talismans had different levels of difficulty. The simplest ones were the peaceful earth talisman and the purifying sky talisman, which were used in the geomancy of yang and yin residences. It was my first time making talismans, so I started with the peaceful earth talisman. The peaceful earth talisman didn't have any other effects. It was only used to inform the land after the yang and yin residences were settled. After laying the yellow paper talismans and grinding the cinnabar, I went to wash my hands. Then, I silently prayed to the ancestor of feng shui, the goddess of the ninth heaven. These are the necessary rituals to make talismans. After everything was prepared, I didn't hurry to make talismans. I first closed my eyes and gathered my energy, reading the mysterious accumulating mantra. The mysterious accumulating mantra was a talisman that could dispel evil spirits. It allowed the feng shui master to guide energy into the talisman better. It was a supplementary technique before making talismans. After doing all this, I felt a wisp of energy appear in front of me. Then, I picked up the weasel hairbrush and started to write on the yellow talisman paper. Each talisman was a complicated and abstruse pattern. It was far from being as simple as the yellow talismans in the hands of the Taoists of the Jianghu. Just remembering these patterns required a lot of time. It took me many years to gradually remember a few of the commonly used yellow talisman patterns. Although I had memorized the patterns in my head, when I started to draw them, I found that it was very difficult. Making talismans wasn't just about drawing the pattern. I had to control the energy to follow the tip of the brush and make it flow into each stroke of the pattern. That way, the completed pattern would be a real talisman. I hadn't even drawn half of the first yellow talisman paper when I made a mistake. It wasn't that my memory of the pattern was wrong. It was just that during the drawing process, the tip of the brush inexplicably changed directions. I couldn't control it at all. It was a sign that the energy didn't follow the brush. Although I could draw the energy like a wisp of silk, it wasn't easy to control the energy to follow the brush. My first attempt was a failure. I put down the brush, but I wasn't discouraged. I closed my eyes and rested for a while. After I adjusted my condition, I tried again. After using the whole stack of yellow talisman papers, I still couldn't draw the peaceful earth talisman. The closest I got was when I was drawing the last 3 strokes. My wrist shook, and I couldn't control it well. I failed again. After 5 consecutive failures, my forehead was sweating profusely. I had consumed a lot of energy, and I even felt a little weak. In this situation, if I continued, I would just be wasting the yellow talisman papers. I couldn't succeed. Looking at the 5 discarded yellow talisman papers in front of me, I forced a smile. No wonder the feng shui master had to charge a high fee to read people's fortune. The things he used were really expensive. I put away the yellow talisman papers, the weasel hairbrush, and the other items, and had a good night's sleep. When I woke up the next day, I felt refreshed. Then, I took out the yellow talisman papers and the other items to try again. This time, I didn't hurry to draw the talisman. First, I found the records about qi in the death scripture. There was an incantation for drawing spiritual energy and gathering energy. At first, it was used to comprehend the energy. However, last night, I summarized the reasons for my failure. I felt that it was because I didn't have a deep understanding of the method to draw spiritual energy. On the one hand, it was because I wasn't familiar with it. On the other hand, I couldn't draw enough energy when I was making talismans. This incantation could temporarily increase the amount of energy I could draw. Perhaps it would have a miraculous effect when I was making talismans. After preparing last night, I picked up the weasel hair brush and read, "Don't let your wandering thoughts be delusional. The Pure Land can return to enlightenment." Don't be ignorant of the current internal energy. It all depends on the cleansing. After chanting, the hair-like energy in front of me seemed to become thicker. I didn't dare to linger. Taking a deep breath, the weasel hair brush moved quickly on the yellow talisman paper. This time it went smoothly. Soon, I reached the last stroke. I read the incantation for the peaceful earth talisman. Yuanshi Peace Town, inform all spirits. Yuzhengguan, the earth has only spirits. Zhuxi Yuji, do not be rash. Return to the right path. Clear the internal and external. Take your positions and prepare to guard the altar. The great master has ordered us to search for evil spirits. Protect the divine king and protect the scriptures. Convert to the great way, Yuan Heng Li Zhen. This was the incantation for the talisman. It was also the last step of making a talisman. Before finishing the last stroke, I had to read the incantation for the talisman. That was the only way to make a perfect talisman. After I read the last sentence, the weasel hair brush in my hand moved up, completing the last stroke of the peaceful earth talisman. Right after that, the yellow talisman paper flashed with a yellow light. After the talisman pattern circled once, the light disappeared, and the vermilion lines on the talisman became lustrous. A perfect, jade-like pattern appeared. It was exactly the same as the peaceful earth talisman in my mind. Finally, it was done. When I picked up the talisman, my heart was filled with great satisfaction. Although it was the simplest earth calming talisman, it was a sign that I could draw spiritual energy into the talisman. This meant that from today onwards, I had officially become a true earth master. Chapter 41. Due to Professor Deng's existence, I felt a sense of urgency to increase my strength. After making the first talisman, I immediately started to study more advanced talismans. Talismans like the peaceful earth talisman that didn't have any direct power were called feng shui talismans. As for the fire talismans that could attack, they were called Taoist talismans. The death scripture mentioned that feng shui talismans were talismans that were closer to nature. The more thoroughly one studied feng shui talismans, the deeper one's understanding of qi would be, and it would be easier for one to enter a higher realm. However, to me, increasing my strength was the most important thing right now. Thus, after making the first peaceful earth talisman, I was ready to try making Taoist talismans. However, before that, I had to make a heavenly deception talisman. To be precise, it was a little heavenly deception talisman. The heavenly deception talisman was a type of purple talisman recorded in the death scripture. According to the classification, talismans were divided into 5 levels: yellow, red, purple, silver, and gold. The higher the level, the more powerful it was, and the more difficult it was to make. The purple talisman was a higher level talisman than the red talisman that Professor Deng had. With my current ability, I couldn't make it. However, the heavenly deception talisman was a special combination of talismans. It consisted of 72 talismans, which corresponded to the number 8 and 9. The little heavenly deception talisman was just one of the heavenly deception talismans. According to the classification, it belonged to the yellow talisman category, which was within my current ability. Its effects were clearly recorded in the death scripture. Confine the bloodline and isolate the ancestral shade. Before coming to the university, I had promised President Liu that I would find a way to relocate his ancestral grave. It was this talisman. At that time, I had promised him 3 years. I didn't expect that only 1.5 years had passed, and I could try to make this talisman. The little heavenly deception talisman was also a feng shui talisman, but it wasn't any less difficult than a Taoist talisman. This time, I had spent 2 months to make it. To make this talisman, I had spent several thousand renminbi on the yellow talisman paper, and I had spent almost all of my savings. Since it was the summer vacation of my sophomore year, I wasn't in a hurry to study talismans. Instead, I wanted to learn some other techniques. Feng shui masters usually cast their spells in 5 forms: talisman, seal, astral energy, incantation, and magic item. Talismans are the simplest kind. As for the other hand seals, footwork, magic arts, and so on, I haven't been able to learn them yet. However, I can understand them in advance. As for magic tools, they are external objects. Although they are powerful, they can only be found by chance. I haven't studied them too much for the time being. In the blink of an eye, it was summer vacation. After returning home, I took the little deception talisman to find Chief Lu. My early arrival made Chief Lu very excited and immediately arranged a welcoming banquet for me. When he learned that I had prepared the talismans to move the grave, Mr. Lu blushed. He couldn't help but shake his hands. He was so excited that he almost lost his composure. This made me feel strange. After all, the matter of the ancestral grave had been delayed for a long time. Moreover, it wasn't something urgent. As a shrewd businessman, Chief Lu shouldn't have lost his composure like this. However, he was so excited that he couldn't control himself. After the welcoming banquet, Chief Lu couldn't wait to bring me to his family's ancestral grave. Although it wasn't the first time I saw it, the geomancy and geography of the graveyard still made me scared. In the geomancy of a grave, it was important to find the dragon's veins. As long as one was a geomancer, he or she would spend their entire life searching for the dragon's veins. Some geomancers couldn't even find a good dragon's veins in their entire lives. It was clear that good geomancy was rare. However, good geomancy was rare, and bad geomancy was also rare. For example, the sky-piercing rainbow and the withered bone dragon, which were like dragons coming and going. I was afraid that even geomancers who had spent their entire lives searching for the dragon's veins had never seen such a thing. I didn't know why Chief Lu's ancestor had such bad luck to find such a place. I wasn't in a hurry to move the grave. Instead, I found the highest mountain nearby and climbed there to carefully observe the surrounding landscape. Although geomancers valued inheritance, they also valued understanding. This kind of geomancy was very rare. To Chief Lu's family, it was a disaster. However, to a geomancer, it was a chance to increase their knowledge. If they could see the origin of the grave, their understanding of the geomancy of a grave would increase. Strangely, while I was observing, I felt that the area around the grave was even bigger than the last time I saw it. Geomancy wasn't always the same. The changes of a natural environment could also affect geomancy. The effect could be good or bad. The geomancy of Chief Lu's family's ancestral grave was extremely bad, but it was getting worse. It didn't look like things would change in the opposite direction when they reached an extreme. Moreover, the changes of the natural environment were a slow process. However, this place seemed to be changing too fast. It had only been 2 years, and the changes could be seen by the naked eye. It was really rare. After observing for a while, I returned to the ancestral grave and took out the little deceiving talisman. I was ready to move the grave. The little deceiving talisman's effect was to seal the connection between Chief Lu's family and the ancestral bloodline. It would also separate the ancestral energy from the ancestral curse. This way, after destroying the metal water formation around the ancestral grave, Chief Lu's family wouldn't be affected by the geomancy of the ancestral grave. After the grave was moved, I would take back the little deceiving talisman to ensure that the grave would be moved smoothly. After opening the talisman, I stuck the little deceiving talisman on the main tombstone of the ancestral grave. Then, I turned around to check Chief Lu's fortune-telling. In just a blink of an eye, both sides of Chief Lu's head turned pale. It was because he didn't have the ancestral energy to protect him. Although the geomancy of Chief Lu's ancestral grave was bad, the ancestral energy had the effect of protecting his descendants. Moreover, the ancestral grave geomancy was suppressed by the metal water formation, which helped Chief Lu a lot. After everything was done, Chief Lu came to me and asked, "Mr. Zhou, can we start moving now?" I nodded. Yes, we can. However, we need to prepare the new grave first. The remains of our ancestors shouldn't stay outside for a long time. We have to move them as fast as possible. Last time, Chief Lu had told me that he had already found the location of the new grave. That was why I didn't take the initiative to help him find it. Hearing that, Mr. Lu heaved a sigh of relief. He waved his hand and said, I've already prepared the new grave a few years ago. On the way here just now, I've already sent people over to fix it up. When we're done here, everything will be ready. That's good. I nodded and walked around the grave. According to the 8 diagrams, I found a place where the 3 statues were buried. I stuck a tree branch in each spot to mark it. After I was done, Chief Lu turned around and waved his hand. More than 10 workers came with tools in their hands. They started to move toward the place I had marked. During this process, Chief Lu's hands were crossed. His eyes were glued to the workers' movements. His body shivered. I was a little nervous. In theory, the little deceiving talisman could cut off the bloodline connection to move the grave. However, before I succeeded, I couldn't make any promises. Fortunately, the workers quickly dug a deep pit in the ground, revealing 3 stone statues of different colors buried underneath. Nothing strange happened in between, and everything went smoothly. This time, they had to dig out all the statues. Since I had told the workers beforehand, they didn't need to be careful. After the top of the statue was revealed, they directly tied a rope to a cart and pulled it out. As the statues were pulled out, the metal water formation was broken. Now, we could only rely on the little deceiving talisman. I became even more tense. However, Chief Lu seemed to relax a little. He didn't hesitate and directly asked all the workers to dig right above the grave. They quickly dug up the grave. As it turned out, my worries were unnecessary. Everything was calm. Under the joint efforts of dozens of workers, it took them only 1 hour to dig up the main grave, revealing a dark hole underneath. Chairman Lu's ancestral grave was quite old. It was more than 200 years old. Logically speaking, a grave of this age would have collapsed unless there was a large underground palace. However, this grave was still in good condition, which was rare. Since we had excavated the grave and it was in good condition, the next step was simple. We just needed to find the coffins, collect the remains, and take them out. As soon as I heaved a sigh of relief, I heard some loud noises coming from the dark hole. Chapter 42. The workers were frightened and ran back like a swarm of bees. Some of them didn't even ask for their wages and ran down the mountain. In the end, a few calm foremen and Mr. Lu's driver managed to convince the workers to stay after a long time. Even though they managed to stay, the workers were still horrified. They gathered in groups of 3 to 5 and kept mentioning the word zombie and so on. After the chaotic scene calmed down, Mr. Lu turned around and looked at me with an extremely sinister expression. He asked me word by word, "Mr. Xiaozhou, you promised me that there would be no mistakes this time." Previously, Director Lu had always been very kind. When he spoke, he would smile most of the time. He looked like an amiable elder. But this time, after his face darkened, I finally saw the aura of a business tycoon. However, I didn't panic at all. I only shook my head at Mr. Lu and said, "Mr. Lu, don't panic. It's not a zombie." "Not a zombie?" Hearing me say that, Mr. Lu's expression calmed down, but he still asked, "Then, Mr. Xiaozhou, why don't you tell me what the sound was? It wouldn't be the sound of a stone falling on the ground, right?" The pong-pong sound was very clear. It was clearly the sound of someone hitting the ground. It couldn't be the sound of a stone falling on the ground. Mr. Lu was clearly warning me not to use a lame excuse to fool him. However, he was thinking too much. I shook my head and said, "Of course it wasn't the sound of a stone falling on the ground. Your ancestor's tomb was preserved very well. After we dug it up, the inside didn't collapse, so there wouldn't be a stone falling on the ground. As for the sound, it did come from the coffin." Mr. Lu's pupils constricted. He stared at me and didn't say anything. It was obvious that he was waiting for me to give him an explanation. I looked at the dark entrance of the tomb and asked Mr. Lu, "Did Mr. Lu think that the sound just now was like a sound?" Mr. Lu followed my gaze and looked at the tomb, then said hesitantly, "Like the sound of a drum?" "That's right." I nodded. It was the sound of a drum. In ancient times, there were drums outside the government offices, also known as the cries for grievances drum. If the common people had grievances, they would beat the drum to express their grievances. Therefore, The sound of beating the drum has a meaning, which is to express grievances. Chief Lu looked at me in confusion. Before he could say anything, his driver couldn't help but ask, "What does it have to do with our current situation?" Of course, there's a connection. I sighed and said, "There's a saying about the sound just now. It's like a corpse hitting a coffin, and the soul crying out for injustice. In fact, it's just the skeleton in the coffin being wronged, and that's why it's making noises." Corpses can knock on coffins? Is it really that amazing? Mr. Lu's driver still had a look of disbelief. I shook my head. This kind of thing is very common. In many construction sites, people dig up ancient coffins. When they hear noises coming from inside, they think it's a zombie. But when they open the coffin, they find that it's just a pile of bones. This kind of thing has been seen many times in the news, so it's not rare. Then, Mr. Little Joe, do you mean that we can directly invite the remains out without any other concerns? Chief Lu's voice softened a lot. It was obvious that he agreed with what I said. I nodded. Everything has a spirit. The corpse was originally buried, but it was dug up for no reason. The corpse that has turned into bones has no ability to take revenge. It can only make a few helpless cries in the unseen world. Of course, it's fine to carry the coffin, but this is your ancestor. The cries clearly means that they don't want to leave this place. Chief Lu, don't you want to reconsider? Although they had turned into bones, everything in the unseen world had a spirit. Although I used a talisman to isolate the connection between Chief Lu and the ancestor's bloodline, they were still related by blood, so the connection couldn't be completely severed. Naturally, they could still feel it. However, what I didn't understand was that Chief Lu moving the grave was for the sake of the ancestors. It was a filial act. If the ancestors had a spirit, they should be happy. Why would they cry out in sorrow? I couldn't understand the reason behind it, but the cries of withered bones were a very sad thing. I couldn't help but advise Chief Lu to reconsider. Chief Lu's expression returned to normal. There wasn't any hesitation on his face. He quickly rejected me and said with a smile, "Being filial doesn't mean that I just let them do whatever they want. Perhaps the ancestors were willing to do so, but as a descendant, I can't just watch them suffer and do nothing. Mr. Little Joe, you don't need to persuade me anymore. Since there's nothing else, I'll arrange for people to move the grave." Then, Chief Lu called the driver over and said a few words. Then, the driver walked to the group of workers and shouted. It was just the sound of sand and stones rolling down from the grave. Don't worry, there weren't any zombies. Also, to help everyone calm down, today's wages will be doubled. If you're willing to carry the coffin, your wages will be doubled. These words finally calmed the workers down. The group of people returned to the side of the grave, put down the extension ladder, and prepared to enter the grave. Although Chief Lu's ancestors came from a rich family, there were rules governing their graves. If they weren't high-ranking officials, their graves couldn't exceed the rules. It was only a simple grave. The workers were a little scared, but Chief Lu's driver volunteered. He went into the grave alone. After walking around for a while, he popped his head up and told the workers that it was safe down there. Then, he called the others to go with him. Only then did everyone cast aside their earlier fear. In order to get their wages quadrupled, they all volunteered to go to the tomb. The group of people busied themselves for a long time before they finally brought out 2 coffins. When I saw the 2 coffins, I was a little surprised. It wasn't because the coffins hadn't rotted after so many years, but because the 2 coffins were red. Moreover, it wasn't the usual crimson red, but a very bright red. Even though they had been buried for 200 years, the color of the coffins wasn't dark at all. From the perspective of funerals, red coffins didn't necessarily represent good or bad luck. It could be related to the burial customs and the owner's birth date. I didn't really care about the color. Chief Lu's ancestral grave was a big family grave. At least 6 or 7 generations of his ancestors were buried here. I thought that Chief Lu would let me stay here until all the graves were moved out. Unexpectedly, after the 2 coffins were brought out, Chief Lu gave me a brown paper bag. He smiled and said, "This time, I'm sorry to trouble you, Mr. Zhou. This is a small gift from me. I hope you won't mind." I was bewildered. I had just opened one grave, and Chief Lu wanted me to leave? I couldn't believe it, but since he had said so, I didn't force him to stay. I greeted him, then bid farewell. When I left, Boss Lou even specially arranged for his driver to drive me all the way back home. On the way back, I recalled what had happened today. I felt that Chief Lou's attitude was strange, and I couldn't understand him. I couldn't find anything after thinking about it for a while, so I didn't think much about it. Instead, I focused on studying talismans. Because I was short on money, I couldn't practice a lot. But this time, Chief Lou gave me 100,000 renminbi, which was more than enough to buy yellow talisman papers and other items. After school started, I went back to school and bought a lot of yellow talisman papers and other items. Every day, I tried to make talismans, which helped me advance quickly. During this time, I purposely went to Suzy Yu's house. Her family seemed to have walked out of the sorrowful atmosphere. However, Suzy Yu had changed a lot. In the past, when she was in school, she didn't wear any makeup and her hairstyle looked very pure. But now, she had makeup on and her hair was permed. She didn't look as pure as before, and instead, she looked a little seductive. Anyway, it was good. As long as she could walk out of the sorrow, it wouldn't be a big deal even if she let go of her old ways. Before leaving, I secretly left 50,000 renminbi for Suzy Yu, hoping that it could help her. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.